Okay, welcome back everybody. Welcome. I hope everybody enjoyed lunch. We're going to start moving up the watershed to our freshwater session, which will feature wildlife that live in the Narragansett Bay Region's 4,148 miles of rivers and streams. First up, we have a team talk by Covino, John Marsland, and Nancy Brown Garcia, who will talk about the important ongoing effort to restore migratory fish passage to Kittacuck or the Blackstone River. I'm going to introduce all three and then ask the team to come up. So Stefanie Covino manages the Blackstone Watershed Collaborative based at Clark University. The collaborative serves to improve climate resilience and watershed health through capacity building and technical assistance in the bi-state watershed's 39 communities and many tribes. She has a master's degree in environmental science and policy from Clark University. She's on the steering committee of the Narragansett Bay Estuary Program and is a Keystone cooperator with the Massachusetts Keystone Project. John Marsland is president of the Blackstone River Watershed Council, Friends of the Blackstone. He's been volunteering for 33 years to preserve, protect, and enhance the Blackstone River. Since retiring as a sprinkler fitter in 2021, he has concentrated on community organizing, environmental advocacy, and collaborating with the local indigenous tribes to garner a stronger voice in support of the Blackstone Fish Passage Project. Save the Bay awarded John the 2023 Allison J. Walsh Award for his outstanding environmental advocacy for his volunteer work. And Nancy Brown Garcia is a Mashowum at Narragansett. She is the Chief Deputy Historic Preservation Officer for the Narragansett Indian Tribe. Nancy is also the chair of the New England Algonquin Indian Council, a native historian, and a traditional folk artist. Nancy has lectured at many colleges and universities throughout the United States and Paris, France. Nancy produces and designs the smallest beadwork in the world, and Courtney is currently walking around passing out those beads to all of you right now. So welcome up to the stage, team.
First, I'd like to say thank you for inviting me here, and I'd like to say a short prayer for all of us that are here. I hope that we all have a long and prosperous life, because we are the people who are guarding and protecting the environment. There should be a room full of people trying to do what we do. But I think we're a rare breed of people who are fighting for the environment. So with that, I'm just going to give a minute of silence so that people can say a prayer. Say Katantawit, thank you for all of the people that came here today. Give them long life and good health, that they may continue the good work that they're doing. Aho.
Thank you so much, Nancy. So, starting with some maybe inspiration here with Nancy, and we'll go through some maybe not great history on the Blackstone, some challenging history, but we'll definitely leave you with inspiration. So I'm Stefanie Covino from the Blackstone Watershed Collaborative, and I just always like to start reminding ourselves where we are and what land we're on. So in our watershed, we say we run from Worcester, Massachusetts to Nantucket, Rhode Island, which is the unceded territory of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, the Narragansett Indian tribe, Nipmuc Nation, and Covino Nation. And these tribes were and are here for a reason, and fresh water is a really important aspect of that, not just ecologically, but culturally as well. So just a reminder that there were people here for millennia that stewarded this land with it, and then there was a time where we changed that, right? And we've changed it for forever. And so what we're trying to do is really restore some of this resilience and ecology in the region. So as I mentioned, the Blackstone Watershed starts way up in Worcester. How many people have been on the Blackstone River before? Oh my God, this is the most I've ever seen. I love that. What a great room. Okay, cool. You guys are pros. We're done here. So the river, as apparently you all know, is about 48 miles long, and it is really important to note that it drops nearly 450 feet over that 48 miles. So kind of our sister watershed leading into the Narragansett Bay is the Taunton River. In comparison, it's about 40 miles long, similar, and drops 40 feet. So that one's pretty flat, lots of floodplain. We are very steep. We have about 39 different communities over 2 states, and of course, many tribes in this area. So the Blackstone Watershed Collaborative was born a couple years ago because the Narragansett Bay Estuary Program said, gee, why don't we work way up in the headwaters in Worcester and the Blackstone as much as maybe we've been super successful in working in the Bay and the Taunton. And so they made this needs assessment report, and it identified 20 different things that we can all do to improve climate resilience and water quality within the watershed. What we needed to do was bring people together, because there are a lot of really great, very small organizations, communities, and businesses that are focused on this work, but not necessarily working together. And so we created this collaborative. We meet monthly. You are all welcome to join us. The link is on our website. I can share it with you. And we try and really share successes and get together on these different goals that we have for the watershed. We have a great water quality monitoring program. We go to 75, I shouldn't say we, our partners, I don't personally, I shouldn't take credit. We go to 75 different sites on the Blackstone River, main stem, and tributaries. Once a month between April and November. They've been doing this for 20 years, and it's one of the most robust data sets, long-term data sets on the river system. We want to be able to enhance that data, and we've recently helped them design a new website and have a clickable map so you can really explore that history of water quality. We want to be able to create equitable access to our waterways. Usually when I ask people, how many folks have been on the Blackstone River? Everyone's like, I don't even know I don't know how to get there. So it's something we want to change. You guys are exceptional, of course. We want to be able to manage water chestnut. You'll see the Blackstone Watershed Council has a great poster out there about water chestnut, which is an aquatic invasive that is destroying a lot of habitats. That is Lonsdale Marsh there in that picture. Was 20 acres of water chestnut that DEM recently got a grant and helped really eradicate over this summer. Of course, I know it's a long-term process. We want to expand our bikeway and greenway along the river. Our goal is to get all the way from Worcester down to Providence. We have chunks of that right now. Enhancing aquatic connectivity. That can mean a lot of different things. That means replacing our culverts, getting rid of dams, creating fish passage and other terrestrial and aquatic species ability to get from place to place. And then lastly, the thing we're going to focus on today is creating fish passage over our lowest of the 4 dams. So as John mentioned this morning, the Blackstone River has also been called America's hardest working river because of that gradient change. You can see on the left, that dark brown color, that's an elevation change from very, very high to very low. So that allowed folks to come in and dam this river in 39 different places. We used to have 49 locks where boats could come in. They'd raise or lower it on the canal. We created a whole canal. It lasted about 10 years and changed the life of this watershed forever before the railroad came along. But it's an important part of our history, right? So at Slater Mill, 1790, we made the first water-powered cotton spinning mill, and that dam remains today. Because of that dam and many, many others, we lack healthy populations of these different anadromous and catadromous species, including river herring, American shad, and American eel, for the past 233 years and counting, because we know it's not going to change tomorrow. So our goal here is really to be able to create enhanced continuity of this watershed, both on the main stem and on our tributaries. We still have 19 dams, so even if we get that lower 4 dam passage, we know that there's a long road ahead of us. Just to highlight on the picture on your left here, we do have U.S. Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland, who visited our watershed recently, hosted by the National Park Service, and talked about the importance of connectivity and thinking about creating this fish passage, not just, again, for the ecological benefits that we would receive, but also those cultural benefits. So there is a tension getting paid here, and advocates have been working on this for decades. I'm coming in at the tail end here, so I'm trying to get them over the finish line. Phase 1 of this project, again, we know it's a long road, is really to get over these lowest of the 4 dams to Lonsdale Marsh. This is another photo of Lonsdale Marsh. That's my mom actually helping us do a water chestnut removal, so all hands on deck for this. And on the right, you can see those different dams. So those first two are real close together. We saw that in the initial overview slide. You can see both of them right at once. You go up a little bit, we have Elizabeth Webbing, and then finally Valley Falls Dam, which is in Central Falls Landing, and then finally the marsh. So we'll go through this a little bit. Our goal is, for this first phase, to have one fish passage, so a vertical slot fish ladder, that goes around the lowest of the two dams, so Main Street and Slater Mill together. Right now, probably literally as we speak, folks at DEM are putting together a grant for a NOAA proposal to create that fish passage. What they've shown is that the fish population studies say that if we can get this passage around those lower two dams and then create what they anticipate would probably be a nature-like fishway around Elizabeth Wedding, at that point, we're not sure what fish passage would look like around Valley Falls, but putting those all together in the model, including a very high degree of uncertainty and including a high degree of mortality, just in case, because as we know, fish passage, fish ladders are really not the same as something like taking down a dam and allowing the fish to migrate themselves. But if we can do this, the numbers show that we would have a healthy population of those species, looking at about 356,000 individuals coming through annually. I believe that study was for herring. You all probably know this, and I don't have to convince you, but why would we do this? Well, the Blackstone is actually the longest tributary to the bay at 48 miles, and if we allow these species like herring, which of course, we've chosen herring sort of as our charismatic species that someone mentioned this morning, so we give out these little herring pins if you come to some of our events. They would really create a significant forage base for other important species that are for recreational or commercial fishing. If you've asked John, we have so many Johns, I'm gonna get this right, John O'Brien of the Nature Conservancy, he says this is the most complex and most well-deserved fish passage project on the East Coast. And that if we can get this done, which we really hope we will, it would provide a forage base for the entire North Atlantic. So it would make a really big regional impact. It would also improve connectivity not just for these migratory species, but also local species that would allow them not just to be trapped between two dams, but be able to go up and down that watershed. And of course, as our two speakers after this will discuss, it's essential for our cultural connection and sense of place. We do understand that a lot of people, who maybe are the folks not in this room today, when they see dams, what do they see? Waterfalls, exactly. So that's a big challenge that we're going to have to talk about as well. So getting rid of some of these dams in the watershed are big, complex, challenging conversations. So a shameless plug, if you are around on October 26th, we're doing a dam removal conference at Clark University. So I mentioned this has been a really long project. I'm not the expert here, but I know you're like, why are you in front of me if you're not the expert? I'm just the one you got today. So I'm going to give you a really quick overview of how we got here with this specific type of fish passage design, which I'll show you in a second. So in 1997, the Army Corps of Engineers did a restoration plan for the Blackstone and did this reconnaissance investigation and identified these, okay, let's do phase one, get over the lower four dams and get to Lonsdale Marsh. That would be able to create this opportunity for these fish to come in, have a place to spawn, and be able to go back and forth. That was a while ago. 2002, the Narragansett Bay Estuary Program, who's obviously been a critical player in this for a number of years, created the Fisheries Restoration Plan, identifying these same goals. They've been written in federal, state, local, tribal, all sorts of different plans. In 2010, they had a plan to create a Daniil fishway. They actually went out to bid on this one, but they only had about $7 million. Am I getting that number right? They had $4 million, and all the bids came back as about $7 or more million. So they didn't get to do this. We weren't able to afford it. And it was a very different design than we have today. In 2019, the Department of Environmental Management created this matrix of alternatives, and they looked at all of these different options. Do we do truck and haul? Do we do a vertical slot? Do we do a Daniil fishway? Do we do, they don't really look that much at removal. It's not quite on the table. We'll discuss why. And that led to what we have now. In 2021, I mentioned that this is what created the Blackstone Watershed Collaborative, is this needs assessment report. Again, fish passage was identified as a priority for this watershed. And finally, where we are today is this goal of we had an in-river vertical slot fishway design, and then finally, in-river vertical slot fishway design, which transitioned to an out-of-river vertical slot fishway design. So what we have is going from below the Main Street Dam, going underneath the roadway, actually, underneath that bridge, if you've been to this area, all the way down around 2 dams, and then we would have an opportunity to create some sort of public education and viewing area on this side of the river. So getting to Lonsdale Marsh, again, we're putting in this $20 million grant to do the final design, permitting, and most of the construction for that first fishway passage around the lower 2. And then whatever's kind of left over for funding, they'll put into design of going around Valley Falls Dam. And once the fish actually get to Valley Falls Dam, what kicks in is that our hydro dam, Valley Falls, would be required by their FERC permit to have to create fish passage. So the first one, Main Street Dam, is also hydro, but it's exempt. They were given an exemption. They're not going to ever have to require fish passage, so we're going to be stepping in with other dollars to get that done. For Elizabeth Webbing, it's owned by the Department of Environmental Management, it's owned by the state since 2010. Right now they have a covenant that says they need to remove the 2 feet off the dam, it's maybe like an 8 to 10 foot dam, but that they can't get rid of it. That's what the existing paperwork says now. There's also, just so you know, a permit or an application to FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, to say, hey, wait, I'm a private developer and I want to put hydro on this dam. Gosh, please don't put hydro on this dam. We have so many other hydro projects. So we all wrote letters of support, or letters against, really, to FERC and said, please, 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 don't let them get this. So we're encouraging DEM, and DEM is taking steps to remove certain equipment to make that less likely to occur, but that is something that's in the works. Future options might be a vertical slot fishway, it might be a nature lake fishway, or I'm the advocate here, I'm the professional nudge, so I'm going to say, well, what about removal? Can we look at the covenant? Can we think about that? We don't have a lot of other options for removal because of our hydro, because of our national park, so maybe this is the one that we can look at. So this is my last slide, and I'll hand it off. This is where you all come in as wonderful advocates. So we know we need about $32 million for this project. The NOAA grant, if we receive it, will be for $20 million. So we're still looking for other funding sources from Fish and Wildlife, from DEM, from others. And any way you have an opportunity to write a letter of support or contact your representatives or Congress folks and say, this is important, this is something that we want to put funding towards, we would appreciate that. DEM is also in the process of creating a website which will have lots of information about fish passage and show how supportive they are in fish passage. So check that out once it's live. And we also need the public to be more engaged in this process. It's happened for a long time and there hasn't been as much public engagement as there perhaps should be. So we're actually creating an advisory committee which will be live in public as of Tuesday. So this is happening very readily right now. And then we're going to have quarterly meetings with the public. So we haven't scheduled those yet, but we'd love to have you attend and hear what's important to you on this design. We're going to have educational opportunities, charrette sessions. We're going to think about what does the observation area look like? How do we connect into local curriculum? What kind of physical models or renderings would be most helpful for you to understand what this might look like and how to support it? So we really want folks to step up and to be the voice of Kittacuck or be the voice of the Blackstone River. And I'll hand it off to John Marsland to talk more about that.
Thank you, Stefanie. How do I do this? You can tell I'm not a professional giving public comments. But my name's, of course, John Marsland, and I've been cleaning the river since 1990. When I first started, the river was loaded with red velvet chairs, tires, you name it. We organized community effort. It wasn't the state or the towns. It was the community that came out and cleaned this river to what it is today. And it's a beautiful recreational resource 18-mile bike path. You can see 4 feet down in the river. And we do have some problems with release of sewage into the river from Nantucket, but they're working on that, and that's what our group does. We try to, there's no one speaking out for the river, and we want to be that voice. Sometimes I get people mad at me, but it's not me, I'm speaking for the river, it's not really me, so that's what I go by. So when this project started and we went for this expedition from Worcester down to Kittacuck, and we stopped at Slater Mill, and all the partners were there for the fish ladder project, one of the common things that DEM said is we need more community support. So I took on that job. I retired from my work 2 years ago, so this is my job now as a volunteer to go out and try to garner more community support. And the first people that were reached out to was the indigenous tribes. I wrote a letter to the chief of the Narragansett Indian tribe, and he sent Nancy Brown Garcia to help, and we've been working together. And we've also worked with the Nipmuc tribe, Asquemenisco band of the Nipmuc tribe, and we produced a film called Kittacuck Speaks that you can see on YouTube. If you Google that on YouTube, it's an 11-minute film that talks about the river before the Industrial Revolution. And we've organized some native intertribal gatherings at Slater Mill 2 years ago, and this will be our second year doing that. So we had over 100 people at the first gathering. Then in May, we organized a spring migration parade to bring awareness of the importance of this fish passage. And we saw the fish that Stefanie had up there. I'm forgetting about this pictures. But that's what we do. That's the Pratt Dam. When it gets clogged up with trees, we go in there, we remove them with chainsaws, and that's like a couple years worth of piled up trees there. And Kittacuck Speaks, that's the film we made. And we've gone out with Nancy to the Boys and Girls Clubs of Northern Rhode Island and spoken to them about indigenous culture. We have to reach the younger generations, as indigenous culture tells you to do things for 7 generations. So we're missing that younger generation, getting involved with the river. My generation, it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. Everyone still thinks the river might smell and be polluted, so that's a hard nut to crack. But we reach out to the younger generations. I think we might have a chance. We're working with local high schools right now to get in there and do like an assembly at Lincoln High School, Central Falls High School, Cumberland, and Nantucket, and try to get students involved. And I hope they follow along so we can teach them how to clean this river. And there's plenty of trash going in with stormwater runoff. And there's so many problems that we have to deal with. It's kind of mind-boggling sometimes that I wish we would have like some positive news. We get a base of plants. Like, where's the positive stuff? I hope this fish ladder gets constructed within my lifetime. And we've been pushing for it since 1990. Now, 33 years later, it's still not there. I'm 63. How much longer do I got? Who knows? But I think reaching out to the tribes as the first stewards of this river is the way to go. And we've had success with that. So I'd like to invite Nancy up to speak here on her behalf.
I would probably like to keep it short and really to the point for me, because what I have found over years of lecturing, that take a long time to lecture, people lose what it is you're trying to say. So for me today, the most important thing that I can offer, I could talk about all the scientific things, but I think we've had enough people come in and actually do that. But I think the importance of the fish levels goes back for centuries before the coming of the Europeans here. I can trace my family here before the Europeans. I am a granddaughter of Uncas, Massasoit, and my all the royal children married. So although I am a Narragansett, I carry the blood of other tribes as well. But when I look at the condition that the Europeans have left, what is my homeland? It breaks me to know that now, yes, when the Narragansetts took care of this land, it was pristine and clean. Now, it's so polluted, I can't even eat seafood that comes from the Narragansett Bay. So all I ask from all of you, and that's why today I had everyone given us tiny little bead, because the message for me in that is, what would any of you do with that one bead? Does anybody have a clue what they could do with that one bead?
Put it together with other people.
Well, you could lose it real easy, right? But what I said is, I hope to be able to share that if we take all those little tiny single beads that are as small as a piece of salt, and we work together, and put them together, we could come up with something as beautiful as this. And I chose to bring this wolf today because I hope that all of you will also take a pledge to be environmental wolves. And when I use that term, it's I hope that you use your eyes and your heart, your pen, your mouth, to help change people's relationship with nature. Nature is us. We cannot live without bats, bees, many of the things, the hawks, the raptors. The relationship that we have with these things, they're our ancestors, they are our friends, they are our source of life. The youth of today are so disconnected from nature that I am petrified to see what nature will look like in just 20 years. We have to teach our children to connect to nature. Nature is them. We can't live without many of the things that are being destroyed right before our eyes. I've spent 40 years in archaeology and helping to protect ancient graves throughout southern New England. In my older years now, I'm kind of retired. It's more vigorous to do that type of work. I've been doing more environmental things. But my heartache in this is the fact that if I'm on an archaeological site and something happens that's not correct, I can get instant action. I took this job on, and there's sewage in our water systems. And no one, what they tell me is, oh, that's just what happens when it rains. What? What do you mean? I'm still appalled. I can really talk about the fish ladders, because to me that's putting the cart before the horse. Are there going to be any fish for the fish ladders by the time the pollution and mutation comes from all of the sewage? I was able to make a difference in Warwick. And Warwick Sewer, it was a fight for 20 years. They didn't pay me for 20 years. But I still went to that job and fought. Because Warwick, that's where my ancestors have traditionally lived for hundreds of years. I've done archaeology there that show remains for 900 years, 300 years. Those are my ancestors. I can't detach myself from that. I can't detach myself from the United States and say, oh, well, it's horrible over there, I'll just move to France. When I signed up for the United States Army in 1977, I fought. I went in there and raised my hand to protect where I live. And I think that all of us, everyone in this room, has the ability to fight to save our environment. But if we don't stop fighting for our environment now, it's not going to be a future for our grandchildren and great-grandchildren to even have. So what I ask everyone is just to remember my words. Please be an environmental wolf. Please teach your children, please teach the other children that you meet, the next generations. Please take care of this Mother Earth. Without us doing that, we're doomed not to be around. The span where human time will be here could end like that. People don't realize if we don't have bees, if we don't have bats, if we don't have clean water, and that's something I've been telling kids in schools for 40 years, is to take a pledge with you and promise that you can be better sharers. I think our generation, they failed. It's about economics.
But economics, money, even a gold bar is gonna mean nothing to you if you don't have clean water and clean food.
And with that, I'm going to say the Batniatni Awan, which is thank you for having me here, and I hope you remember my message.
All right, thank you to Nancy, John, and Steph. I'm going to bring up your question slide. See what we've got here. Okay, does one of you want to take that one?
John, why wouldn't you know this best? Because I guess they have contracts.
Here, John, I'll bring it up. Let me see if I can bring it up. I'm just trying not to lose my beat here.
Oh, they shouldn't have been exempt. Must have been an inside deal with government. That's all I had to say. Why? There's no reason. There's not a good reason why they should be exempt. That's my opinion. Economics.
Okay, thank you all. And next up, change the slide here. Next up, we have Brian Bastarache. Brian has been part of the Bristol County Agricultural High School Environmental Conservation Department since 1995 and has been the department chairman since 2005. He spearheaded the creation of cooperative conservation projects, which have provided several real-world opportunities that have enhanced the educational experience of the students, as well as tangible assistance to the conservation efforts of the cooperating partners.
All right, thank you. They said I have to use the mic. So. Thank you to the food service folks. That lunch was great. And lunch is one of my top 2 favorite meals. So I was asked to talk about one of the bigger projects we do, which is head starting, mostly rare turtles, and how it's used as a conservation tool, because it's been a little controversial over the years. So they asked us because over the years, I think we started this in 2009, on a whim, conversation over refreshments, and then suddenly crazy stuff happens. So I'm sure it's happened to you guys. So over the years, we've done quite a few. We're up to 11 species now that we've worked with in various capacities. Some not many, others well over 1,000 individuals of each species, and some just a handful of individuals from species such as chicken turtles. Very few of those. We don't just do this. You guys get this, but people call me all the time. I found baby turtles. Can you take them? I go, no. It's probably illegal. I don't know what you have. But we work with both state and federal agencies here and in other states, actually all the way down to Georgia, and some private ecological consulting companies and NGOs that we work with to do this with them. It's nothing we ever come up with. It's someone approaches us and says, hey, would you help us with this? And we go, yeah, let's give it a shot. That sounds like a great idea. So what I want to do is give you a quick explanation about what head starting is, the history of it, criticisms and concerns, because that's a valid thing, our process, and why you need to know good old natural history. I'm going to talk fast because this is supposed to take me an hour. They said 20 minutes. I said, we haven't met. So head starting. Head starting is a verb. It's when you take young animals and you raise them up to their most vulnerable times, and then you release them after they've gotten through this high mortality stage. And if you're looking for a citation on that, it was me just now. Nobody seems to have this in print anywhere of what head starting actually is. There seems to be quite a lot of thoughts on it. And the whole idea is you take tiny things which everything likes to eat, you make them a little bigger, and in a lot of species, Survivorship is related to size. If you get them to be bigger, their survivorship increases because fewer things can eat them. So what we have to do is create an illusion. We create an illusion of an endless summer, because right now, all the little turtles that we're just catching in the last few weeks, from late August, and some might still be hatching now, they're pretty much not doing anything. They probably haven't eaten much, particularly they hatched very recently, and they're going into their winter dormancy. They're not going to grow. Next spring, they're going to be the same size they were when they came out of the egg this year. And when they're teeny, lots of things eat them. So all winter, they don't do much of anything. They're certainly not growing. So we keep them warm, and we keep the lights on often to trick them into summer so that they keep eating, they stay metabolically active, and hopefully that means they keep growing. And then we take them from September, and over a course of about 9 months, we try to turn them into bigger things that fewer other things can eat. And we have lots of work done by folks that says survivorship increases with size. And the term head starting, you can pretty much attribute that to Archie Carr. Probably everybody in this room knows who Archie Carr is. If you don't, you should. He worked with sea turtles, and they're kind of another group of turtles. They don't really talk to us freshwater turtle people, and it's okay. That's fine. But Archie was pretty cool. And he's the guy who first started thinking about this, at least that I could find. First started thinking about this when they found out, hey, little ones get eaten very, very quickly. So the first official one I could ever find effort was with Kemp's Ridley sea turtles down in the Gulf Coast. And it started in '78, and it seems to have lasted about 10 years, which is really weird because turtles don't do anything quickly. But we all know there's other things that happen. The next one I could find ever is right here in southern New England, was Mass Wildlife's effort, spearheaded with Terry Graham, for at the time, the Plymouth red-bellied turtle. Now, they call it the northern red-bellied cooter, but shut up, they're Plymouth red-bellied cooters. That's why they're special. Not like all those in North Carolina, which are just northern red-bellied cooters. Same species, just a cool population. Head starting's been used with lots of things, mostly ectotherms. It's been used with some snakes. It's been used with some amphibians. It's been used with crocodilians. It's been used with some fishes. And lots of turtles, it seems. Turtles seem to lend themselves. But turtles also get more love than most other reptiles and amphibians, which is, don't get me started on the PRDs of snakes. We've done a lot of work with eastern spadefoots, raising, I couldn't even tell you how many we've raised for Mass Wildlife over the years. I'm just going to click through that because I have 20 minutes. So there are lots of concerns, and people very rightly have been talking about concerns. They're saying, well, what if these things are not quite right because you grew them 4, 5, 6 years worth of growth in a matter of months? What if they try to sort of home to that head starting facility, like a homing pigeon? Head starts won't know how to survive in the wild because they're taken care of, and it's a halfway technology that doesn't really address the root problems, and almost all of those are valid concerns. We'll make fun of some people in a minute. The first one, they're anatomically or physiologically abnormal, and I tell you, not if you do it properly, not these turtles. If you have the proper diet and the proper light and the proper attitude of not just making the biggest animal being the winner of the biggest turtle contest, they'll be fine. What if they try to home to the head starting facility? Well, that doesn't make any sense. For non-sea turtles, their nesting sites are ephemeral. They don't last forever. They're open areas that occur with some disturbance, and over time, they grow up and they're not good nesting habitat anymore. So fire, wildlife, something, I hate to say it, sometimes dirt bites make great habitat, and you've got to get the dirt bites to go away. Bulldozers, making turtle habitat really looks like carnage, environmental carnage. As long as then the carnage stops, they leave it like this. In fact, that box turtle with a radio on it was at an airport. Lots of them were nesting there. Turtles who nest on beaches, like sea turtles, yeah, beaches will be in a certain place for a very long time, for
thousands of years at a time. So for most turtles, that's not a valid concern. They won't know how to survive in the wild. They don't really know how to address people who tell me they're biologists who ask this. Sure, if you're a bird, we saw that with California condors. They were raised by people, and then they landed next to people in the park and said, hey, can I have your sandwich? Now we do all kind of stuff with puppets, so they don't even turn on people. Turtles don't do any of that. They learn nothing from mom, so it's completely not our understanding of turtle biology. And don't know what else to tell them. The concern that it's a halfway technology that doesn't address the true root of the problem, that's a valid concern. So we're making these animals bigger so fewer predators can eat them. Well, none of those were ever the problem. They were here with the turtles for many, 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 many centuries, and everything was fine. So they're not really the issue. But since we can't even get a dam torn down, which is baffling me in 2023, much less get Route 2 torn up or get people to keep their damn cats inside or cover the trash properly, this is the best we can do. So this was never the problem. So it is the treatment of a symptom. Absolutely. It's not the cure. You want to address the cure, we have to deal with the consumption market. We have to deal with introduced species and disease. We have to deal with subsidized nest predators, all those things that like to eat cat food and leave outside, and their unsecured trash cans that occur in higher densities near people than away from people, like skunks, raccoons, foxes. Illegal pet trade, enormous. I have a lab full of 100 turtles that were confiscated right now. Road mortality, huge, affecting the most important individuals in the population, the adult female. And good old habitat loss. Yeah, don't hold your breath. Like the nice lady said, enough people in this room to get these things done for real. We're working on it. But we're addressing the symptoms because we're the emergency room. We have to keep that heart attack patient alive until we're smart enough to address the wellness of all those things. So we're doing what we can when we can. And let's face it, you and I, like we all drove here, most wildlife is going to need some active help in an environment that looks like that. So I like the term, one of the cooperators we have at the University of Georgia, Kirk Goldman, talks about offensive conservation. He doesn't want to just stop the loss anymore, he wants to start taking back. Yeah, let's go get him, Kurt. So, but some of these criticisms came from Peter Pritchard. If you don't know who Peter Pritchard is, you should go learn about him too. He said, hey, yeah, but we need data. We should have data to decide if this actually helps recruitment or not. And that's a valid question. If you have any respect for science at all, you go, absolutely, let's check into that. So let's check. So this is what we started with landing turtles in 2009, and this was wrong in so many ways. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was trying to perform an experiment with the University of Georgia on is head starting effective, at least for this species. And they had models that said we put 50 individuals into the habitat for 10 years and then see what happens. And they had nowhere to actually do this. So I was like, oh, we could do it. And then now I'm standing here. This is our new lab. Actually, that's old. There's 229 in that room right now of several species. Four species this year. Over the, whatever it's been, 14 years, we have a 96% survival rate of head starting. Not every individual survives the process. We'll talk about that. That's important too. So that's from the day they arrive to the day they are released. We put out a little over 2K turtles since then. So all of the animals we have come from in situ incubation. They incubate where mom put them. Mother knows best. They are allowed to experience natural temperature ranges, which in most of the species we have determines the sex of the individuals. Not all our species, but most of them. Their nests get protected. This is because of all those subsidized nest predators that we have. Helps keep the skunks and raccoons and the foxes out. That's a commitment because if they do hatch, one morning you come in and it's full of those little turtles underneath. If you leave them there, clearly they will die, they will bake in the sun, they'll starve, or whatever. So you gotta make sure you get them out. You could release these individuals right now. That's called direct releasing. You've already helped because you saved the nests from the subsidized nest predators. If you probably can't see, but they all have notches. All of those animals that were direct release, that was part of our experiment. 25% were directly released in the new habitat, 25% was to be head started, and then they're still every year tracking to see if head starting had a positive influence on recruitment. So direct releasing is still excellent. Terrapins I work with in Taut River, we just directly release for 5 minutes. So species appropriate housing, it's hard. You got to make sure you have the right housing for the right species. Simple is very key. Don't make it pretty. It's got to be clean. Turtles are filthy. Lighting is tremendously important. Photo period and wavelengths. Diet's important. Sorry, vegetarians, you're difficult. Herbivores are difficult. Plants are very variable. You have to get that diet right. Carnivores are simple. Filtration, they're filthy. Biosecurity is a must. We have to monitor growth because they don't always grow at the same rate. Individuals vary even within a species, so they have to be identified individually with notches or numbers. And there's just some individuals who are the same age, showing you the differences. If something's wrong, we got to separate it. Growth monitoring, every week, we chart all the data. If someone's not growing, we try to come up with issues, ways to address that. Head starting selection is not natural selection, so we try to make every single individual survive. I'm always trying to tell students individuals don't matter. I don't care what your mother told you. Populations matter. But just because you're well suited to live in the lab doesn't mean you're well suited to live outside and vice versa. So we need to save all those genetics, the biodiversity of genetics. But biosecurity is tremendously important. We have animals from multiple states that are going to be released. You do not want to release germs that are novel to a population. So we try to keep the outside germs outside, the inside germs inside. We don't want to bring any home with us either. Biosecurity is tantamount even from population to population, from the trash to the food service, or from turtles from North Carolina to turtles from Massachusetts. So we have strict protocols on how we deal with that. Every lab has hand washing stations and foot baths. And it's not just procedures, you have to think of it properly in everything you do. So, Dr. P, here's your data. Mass Wildlife has been post-release monitoring their red bellies for a few years, found entire populations that didn't exist before this, that were only made up of head starts. The Blandings turtle data showed recruitment of head starts well above not only the direct releases, but what should be expected biologically from field work. And these were numbers at the bottom from Condon, who did some of the earliest work on Blandings turtles, some very important work on Blandings turtles in the Midwest. So our numbers were well exceeding his expected numbers. So we have increased survivorship. We find them eating natural diets in the wild once they're released. They're acting like normal turtles. They're overwintering in the same places as the adults. So they're acting normally. Home ranges are very wide in our released wood turtles. At first, the first season, and then after that, they settle right in and they figure out where they want to be. So we have site fidelity. They stay where they're put. They don't try to find their way back to Bristol Aggie. They are not quite acting normally when it comes to reproduction because they're bigger and sexual maturity is more a function of size and age in these creatures. They're actually mating earlier. And they're producing viable offspring, even the females. We have 20-something wood turtles that are the offspring of Head Start graduates this year. So if those females are coming online 3-4 years early, reproductively, that's going to change those population models tremendously. So that's pretty exciting. Reproductive success, we find unmarked Plymouth red belly hatchlings in the wild and wood turtles. Post-release monitoring, by the way, the good old Kemp's Ridleys, not only did were they coming back, but they actually tried to move them to a U.S. beach because they were one beach they nested on in the world was Mexico. They're having a very difficult time protecting it. They tried head starting and imprinting on a U.S. beach in southern Texas, and it started working, but it only started working 30 years later as it turns. So, the value of good old natural history, well, you got to understand these species' idiosyncrasies, which you only know after messing with them. Blanding's turtles, they're horribly picky eaters. Think of the worst kid you know, that's them. They will change color. You raise them in a white bin, they will be very yellow. Raise them in a black bin, they will be less yellow. First bins we had were very white, and we had 2 kids presented a poster at a conference that you can change their color. So we were sending out day-glow turtles the first year. We had no idea. And they came to me with the hypothesis that, yeah, science, you can prove stuff doesn't happen, and son of a gun, they proved it did happen, or they should. And they're so slow growing, they're the worst. Red-bellied cooters, they do well, their mortality is usually pretty low, they grow like weeds for things that just eat leaves. So it's a lot of food though, not many calories in a salad. They eat a lot of food, which means a lot of waste. It's like having a sheep in a fish tank. And you got to make sure you're feeding them the right vegetables. Teaching kids what vegetables are, collards versus chard. I mean, they can have one but not the other. That's a whole lesson. Wood turtles, they climb like monkeys, but they'll eat anything. They're terribly messy. They're very stinky and smart as a whip. Snapping turtles, we've done some mostly to test our systems and because I like them. Nobody else does. They take a long time to start feeding. They're born with they're hatched with a lot of yolk still in their guts, so they scare people, of course, that they won't eat. They beat each other up. They're a little rough on tank mates. Keep them singly if you can. Terrapins are very interesting. We did some work with Hofstra University. They come out very small out of the egg. Complex natural history, of course. They don't spend their first year in the water. They head to the woods. They're very weird. They eat a lot, they grow fast, and they grow best with a little salt in the water, but not brackish water levels. They're really weird. That was some of the work we did in Hofstra. Check it out, water balance, hatchling turtles. I think it's in the Canadian Journal of Zoology. Box turtles, oh, they're so cute. They need lots of cover to eat. They get very stressed out. They want to hide constantly. So they might need a little coaxing to eat. We don't feed a lot of live foods for biosecurity and parasite reasons. Might have to give them some chopped earthworm at first. They can grow fast, sometimes too fast if you give them too much protein. And they are the most horrible little demons you've ever met. They will beat the heck out of each other. They will seriously injure each other. You have to give them plenty of space. In nature, they disperse. Unlike the raccoon doesn't catch them all. I think she's getting ready to tackle them. Well, someone who has the legal authority brings them to us, and we say, okay. We don't ever ask for them. No, probably not. What kind of outreach do you do to help the back? We do a lot, actually. October 21, 22, come to our fall show at the school. You can find us in the Natural History Museum. Working in ag school students versus research lab. Well, we kind of are a research lab. That's the fun part. If I just had to teach biology every day, we get to do cool stuff. I learned a long time ago. I had a mentor teacher said, entertain yourself first, and then the kids follow you. What species we currently had starting? The Plymouth red-bellied cooters, landing turtles, box turtles, wood turtles. I think that's all that's in that room right now. One of my people run that lab right now, so, but I think that's it. 229 individuals, I know that. All right, done? Thanks.
All right, thank you, Brian. Next up is Corey Pelletier. Corey has worked for the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management's Division of Fish and Wildlife since 2016 as a freshwater fisheries biologist. Much of his work focuses on habitat conservation for species of greatest conservation need, and more particularly on research and management actions to protect wild brook trout and their habitats. Corey recently completed a master's thesis, congratulations, studying movement response and habitat selection of wild brook trout during periods of stressful temperatures in fragmented stream networks. Let's bring up, oh my goodness, what is that? That's not Corey's presentation. There you go. Take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Corey Pelletier, a fisheries biologist for the Division of Fish and Wildlife. Today I'm going to talk about native brook trout and biodiversity. What ecosystems do brook trout represent, and how do we protect and conserve these into the future? So today I'll go over brook trout and their habitat, the eastern pearl shell mussel, freshwater macroinvertebrates, threats to our cold water resources, and how we can improve resiliency of these species. So starting off with the eastern brook trout, our only native salmonid to Rhode Island, well now that the Atlantic salmon is nearly extirpated. This is a very iconic species, as you can see due to its beauty, its vivid colorations, and it's a prized catch by anglers as well. And there's also cultural significance to this fish. But with that being said, they're declining across their native range. And that native range extends from northern Georgia into southern Canada. And they're declining more so at the southern extent of their range due to warming, mainly due to warming waters. And therefore, they are both a state and regional species of greatest conservation need and listed in the Rhode Island Wildlife Action Plan. So a little bit about what they require, what their habitat is. Well, they're a cold water dependent species. So their preferred temperature range is around 12 to 18 degrees Celsius. And 24 to 25 degrees Celsius is sort of that thermal threshold of where you may or may not find brook trout. And in Rhode Island, we do find them in quite warm waters, sort of on that brink of their temperature threshold. They also require a high content of dissolved oxygen, ample physical cover, such as boulders, large woody debris, undercut banks, and food. So they prey on primarily aquatic macroinvertebrates, as well as terrestrial insects. And some other life history requirements. Spawning, they require a specific gravel size to spawn in, and that must have upwelling groundwater to provide enough oxygen for those eggs to hatch. So jumping pages a little bit, I'm going to dive into another freshwater species called the eastern pearl shell mussel. And so their primary, similar to other freshwater mussel species, their primary ecosystem function is water filtration. So this species in particular is dependent on salmonids for reproduction and dispersal. So if you don't know anything about freshwater mussel biology, they're very interesting animals, and they require host fish species to successfully reproduce. So what they do is they expel their larvae when a host fish species is nearby, and that larvae, called the placidia, attaches to the inside of a fish's gills, where it takes in nutrients for a period of time until it drops off into the stream sediments. And so these species require fish, and a lot of times specific species of fish, in order to reproduce and disperse. And so this species in particular is very limited in distribution in Rhode Island and is only found in areas with brook trout. So it would be considered a cold water species, whereas other mussels are less dependent on water qualities and temperatures and have maybe more general host fish species. And there will be a mussel talk. Not giving up too much of that. All right, so jumping again into some freshwater macroinvertebrates. There's hundreds of species of macroinvertebrates in our freshwaters. Here we have a plot of species richness from the early 90s through to about 2015. And so there's no need to worry about the x-axis when reviewing this, but pay attention to the y-axis, which is number of species. And so you can see the maximum is about 45 all the way down to less than 5 species. And these are individual samples in unique streams. The big takeaway from this is that our best qualities, our highest quality streams, all of which contain fairly robust populations of brook trout, are the ones with the highest species richness, the most species found. And the sites with the least amount of species richness are typically the poor water qualities sites and sites that do not contain brook trout. So the main takeaway from this is that in our high quality streams, we have a much higher biodiversity of these insects that support not only brook trout, but a wide variety of other species. So here's a set of plots from a recent publication that just came out, looking at the status of macroinvertebrates nationwide. And so I want to focus your attention to the 2 plots on the left-hand side. These show, the top left plot shows total density of macroinvertebrates, and we can see that that's declining. And I should mention that these are broken out by the dominant land use class, but we can see in all the land use classes, macroinvertebrate density in streams is declining. And on the bottom plot, we can see species diversity. Now you might ask yourself, why is species diversity increasing? The density is decreasing? Well, in macroinvertebrates, there's generalist species, and then there's sensitive species. And those species may be sensitive to disturbance or water temperatures. And so these authors hypothesize that the diversity are increasing because these more generalist species are taking over a lot of our freshwater rivers and streams. So now I've kind of set the stage with some of these species and taxa that make up our cold water resources in the state of Rhode Island. And these species are some of the most at-risk, these are the most at-risk habitats due to climate change and other disturbances. So we've talked a little bit about today climate change, and we've documented, we've seen that water temperatures are on the rise, and they're only predicted to continue to rise. And with that, we see our weather patterns changing, becoming more erratic, and therefore we're getting more variable flow conditions. So more drought, more extreme floods. And then there's development. I'm not going to dive too deep into this because that's sort of a whole other set of impairments, especially to these sensitive resources. The wild brook trout, as we heard earlier, canary in the coal mine, wild brook trout is considered the canary in the coal mine for these cold water habitats. And so if we're losing brook trout, we can expect that we're losing some of these other sensitive species, such as macroinvertebrates and freshwater mussels. So what do we do about this? We've heard a lot about dams today, dam removal. The path forward for these sensitive species, these species that require cold water, cold clean water, is to restore connectivity. So what does that mean? improve access throughout our watersheds, remove these dams and these barriers to allow these species to access new areas, to adapt to disturbances. So dams, again, we've heard a lot about these. Here's a map of Rhode Island, and in green you can see all of the catchments or the smallest scale watersheds that contain wild brook trout. And in red, you can see all of the dams. Now there's nearly 700 mapped or registered dams in the state of Rhode Island. But that's just scratching the surface. I know from experience being out in these systems, there's numerous small dams when you get into the headwater streams, which are typically your cold water resources. Numerous of these small dams that aren't on this map here. So you can only imagine the extent of these barriers scattered throughout our watersheds. And in addition to dams, we have road stream crossings. So we have nearly 700 mapped dams. There's thousands of road stream crossings throughout the state. Not all of these are bad, but oftentimes when you have perched culverts, which comes from poorly designed culverts or degradation over time, these function as barriers. So on the top left here, we're not going to pass any aquatic organism through that. Same with the bottom here. And then in the top right, well, it's okay. Maybe a fish can swim through there, but an aquatic invertebrate is not likely to make its way up through there. And then on the bottom here, we kind of have our ideal situation, a bridge span with a free-flowing stream underneath. So what are some of the impacts that these barriers have on our aquatic ecosystems and our cold water habitats in particular? Well, talk about fragmentation. Segmenting these critical habitats, constraining these species from moving between a variety of habitats. Furthermore, when we have dams that create impoundments, we get this warming effect. So when you have a large body of still water, especially during the summertime, the solar radiation is heating that water. And so where you may have a cold water stream flowing into an impoundment, especially on the hottest days of the year, you're going to have what is now a warm water stream flowing out. And that's going to change the whole species community below these. And then in addition, we have reduced water quality. So impoundments are often thought of as nutrient sinks. So I like to think of dam removal as sort of ecosystem-based restoration. We're targeting these projects maybe for a certain species, river herring, shad. In my presentation here, brook trout. We want to focus on removing these barriers to allow these aquatic organisms to move freely through the systems. But they have an impact on the whole ecosystem. So by removing these dams with impoundments in particular here, we're going to improve water quality, allow these disturbance-sensitive species to recolonize these water courses. We're going to reduce maximum temperatures. So we're going to allow these temperature-sensitive species to recolonize these habitats. We're going to restore thermal refugia, allow for protection of these species to move out of disturbed areas that may become too warm. So therefore, we're increasing habitat space for these sensitive species, and therefore affecting carrying capacity, increasing carrying capacity. And lastly, we're going to mitigate the effects of increased warming. So we talk a lot about climate change, water's warming. As water's warm, if we can restore these cold water resources, to reduce the annual mean temperatures and allow these species to thrive in them throughout the year, and species from outside of those individual streams to utilize these habitats as refuge. This is going to improve resiliency of these species in the face of a changing climate. And then removing barriers, such as dams and culverts, among others. We are going to allow these species to access a broader range of habitats by giving species the ability to move about systems and watersheds. We're going to provide the ability for them to access these important habitats for various life history stages. We're going to allow them to disperse, which leads into improved gene flow. So for adaptive potential, we want intermixing of populations, and by improving the connectivity of these systems, we're going to allow the species to move about and improve the gene flow. And with this all, we should effectively be able to at least maintain the biodiversity that we have now in our freshwater systems, and if not, increase that biodiversity, especially of these temperature and disturbance sensitive species. Again, improving the resiliency of these species to survive. And lastly, this is kind of a side note, but it's extremely important, land conservation. So on the map here, we can see all of the state-owned lands throughout the state of Rhode Island, as well as municipal and NGO protected lands. We need to keep this moving. Again, I didn't get into just development, but that is one of the biggest problems with conserving, especially cold water habitats. And the more land that we can protect and conserve, the more ability we'll be able to save these critical habitats. And I'd like to leave you with this. Collaboration is and will be the key to success in maintaining biodiversity in Rhode Island. Thank you.
Any questions?
The hatchery trout I fished for yesterday impacting the Brook trout. Great question. Contentious topic. There's been a lot of studies about this. There has been impacts shown from introducing stock species, but I argue that that is not the biggest concern for these species. Improving the habitat is the most important thing. Removing these dams, where a lot of places we find brook trout, where I talk about these cold water habitats, we're talking headwater streams, and a lot of places that we don't stock. And that's not to say that they do not intermix, they do. But we need to focus on improving the quality and quantity of this cold water habitat. How many cold water streams? I don't have a good answer for that. Quite a bit, but a lot of them are places that are not easy to get to, very thrown in. But there are also some, the Wood River is a prime example of still a cold water stream, but quite accessible. Runnings River. I'm not super familiar with the Runnings River, but I believe it's in a more developed area. Again, I don't know the dynamics of that system, whether there are impoundments. Impervious surface is very detrimental to brook trout habitat, and I believe They say that any area with greater than 5% impervious surface near a river is going to decline the amount of brook trout in that habitat. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you, Corey. And Corey, I'm actually really glad you covered some freshwater mussel biology in your talk because unfortunately Maria Gabriel is unable to join us today. So we'll record her talk or possibly host a webinar for her and upload it with the rest of the program so that we all can learn from her later on. I know that she was really looking forward to sharing her love of freshwater mussels with us. So let's take a coffee break. Let's come back in 25 minutes at 2:55. And we'll come back for our last session of the day, which is our Unsung Heroes session. So please come back at 2:55. And if you haven't gotten a chance yet, please check out the art installation that is here for the event out by the restrooms. It's called Tipping Points, brought to us today by Susan Israel with Climate Creatives. Thanks, everybody. All right. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Okay, this is our last session of the day. This is called our Unsung Heroes session. And this session is intended to feature wildlife that is often lesser known or maybe lesser loved, and perhaps change your initial perceptions about those species. I've had a couple folks talk to me about, why are we featuring these species in a presentation by the Estuary Program, and the answer is that it's about connectivity. We are the Estuary Program, but there is no healthy estuary without a healthy watershed feeding into it, right? Thank you. And so I'd like to challenge you to think about how these species and the health of these populations are connected to healthy rivers and healthy estuaries, and down the river, healthy oceans, right? So first up, we have Lou Perrotti. Lou is the Director of Conservation Programs for the Roger Williams Park Zoo in Providence, Rhode Island. He serves as the zoo's representative on most local, national, and international conservation collaborations, including those at the Association of Zoos and Aquariums level, and manages the zoo's ongoing conservation and research initiatives. And Lou will talk to us today about a truly Halloween-worthy critter, the American burying beetle.
Thank you, Darcy. I was so inspired by the horseshoe crab talk that I'm going to do mine in Norwegian death metal. So, not really. The American burying beetle, species dear to my heart. You see, we're going on 30 years effort to try to put this species back into the landscape. It's been quite a go, but we're very proud of the work that our team's doing to keep this beetle on the landscape. For those of you not familiar with the species, it's the largest of the Nicrophorus genus, or burying beetles, carrion beetles. Vital to the ecosystem, they're a high-end recycler, right? Sexually dimorphic, makes it easy for us. Females have a little triangle above the mandibles. Male has a rectangle, so they're easy for us to sex. You don't have to be squeezing abdomens and doing anything crazy like that. They are a burying beetle, so they do require a vertebrate or carrion item to reproduce. And they are a specialist, so they can't utilize a deer, they can't utilize a paramyscus mouse. They need something between 80 and 180 grams, something about the size of a mourning dove, for them to be able to successfully bury it and prepare it. And what you're seeing here is a male and female, and this was in the lab. We used a rat in this case. Male and female will win rights to the carcass. They will bury that carcass within 24 hours. 5 to 7 days, all the fur or feather has been stripped from that carcass, and they roll it into a ball and manipulate it They even can melt bone, believe it or not. Whatever secretions they use, they secrete it with anal and oral secretions that keep it from getting any kind of bacterial or fungal buildup on it. So they are little chemical factories. When the female lays her eggs and they hatch, she will chew a little cavity into the top of the carcass ear, where at that point she can put them in there, and she'll place them in there where she can keep them all together. Because at that stage, their mandibles aren't strong enough to eat on their own, so they stroke the mandibles of the adults to solicit feedings, which is amazing. And it was actually animal behaviorists that wanted to study this unique behavior that noticed the decline of the species. We weren't seeing it anymore. First, they go through 3 instars. First instar is about the size of a grain of rice. Every 2 days they molt. Second instar is about the size of a Good and Plenty candy. 2 days later, they're about the size of your little finger, and they look like little Michelin men there. By that time, it's about a 15-day process from burial preparation to when those larvae are third instar. At that point, there's not much carrion left. That triggers the larvae to leave the brood, burrow down into the soil, 45-day pupation. Once they pupate, 21-day maturity, and they're ready to breed again. But they typically overwinter and the adults die. So they're kind of an annual cycle insect. Beetle disappeared from 90% of its historic range. So here's an example of an animal that used to be all over our estuaries, all over New England. Disappeared from 90% of its range due to, of course, habitat loss, habitat fragmentation. And we all know when we lose habitat, we change the species composition of that habitat. You push your predators out, you get more scavengers. And this is an example of a species being a specialist that relied on species that now are extinct. The passenger pigeon was one that we can actually map almost the decline side by side. We think this was a specialist that was cleaning up the mortality of that very profile species. And then, of course, heath hens, another bird that would have had high mortality of chicks the right size during the active season of beetle. Out west, things like Carolina parakeets. And then we throw in modern day stressors like light pollution, pesticides, and it spells doom for this very special beetle. So it was listed by the United States Fish and Wildlife Service as endangered in 1989. And a recovery plan was drafted by actually Chris Rathel from the Rhode Island DEM and Michael Amaral at the time from the United States Fish and Wildlife. And that plan called for, it looks like many other recovery plans for endangered species, of course, monitor the existing wild and extant populations, maintain captive populations to see if we can, keep it on the landscape, breed it successfully, and initiate a reintroduction effort. Try a pilot one. And back in the days, we chose Pennakees Island in the Elizabeth Island chain. Because the only extant population of this beetle now in the entire eastern half of the United States is Block Island. That's it. There's 6 populations east of the Rockies, out in the west, in Kansas, South Dakota, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. But here in the east, only Block Island. And we'll talk about why it might have hung on Block Island. So we conducted a pilot reintroduction with beetles at the time that were reared at Boston University by Andrea Kozel, who developed a lot of the husbandry protocols that we use to this day. We've tweaked them a bit, but we use them to this day. And then we wanted to prioritize areas to look for additional release sites. And here in New England, we chose Nantucket because it's very similar to Block Island in habitat and the fact that it has no mammalian scavengers or competition for carrion resource. I mean, we have an occasional crow get into a brood or a gull. And ironically enough, we've done some carrion studies out there, and white-tailed deer were eating our quail off the ground. So it's funny, we saw that film of the salt marsh sparrows being predated by white-tailed deer. And then we're looking for additional populations that might have been missed over the last 100 years. So, we can use community science to get people out putting pitfall traps in the ground, looking for the species. And we do that here in Rhode Island with actually middle school teachers, which is a really great program. So our history with the beetle, we were approached by U.S. Fish in 1994, right after the pilot study was done, to see if we wanted to be the source of a captive colony that would be the source of this new reintroduction effort on Nantucket Island. And back then, insect conservation was like, oh my God, nobody was even really talking about pollinators, or it's like bug conservation. This was like cutting edge, you know, and I just saw that this is going to be the future, you know, and if nothing else, what we learned from this beetle, we're going to be able to apply it to other species, and that is, and still is the case. So since '94, we've bred, man, I think those numbers are higher now, well over 8,000 beetles, and put just about 3,000 beetles onto Nantucket Island from 1995 to 2006, and then we stopped releasing and just started to monitor the population from that point on. It actually, if anybody's ever heard of the species survival programs that the AZA has, and you know, we have SSPs for everything from African elephants to giraffes, the burying beetle was actually the first insect to ever become an SSP species for the AZA. So it's kind of been a flagship species for invertebrate conservation, which is great. And from 2006 and to currently, up to this summer, we just continue to monitor and supplement the population on Nantucket. Rearing them in the lab is great. It's not an expensive project at all. We use you know, shoe boxes I buy at Walmart, and you know, sandwich boxes that we can order and buy, and deli cups and that kind of thing. Doesn't take a lot, so it's a great project for small institutions or institutions that don't have a lot of budget to be able to make an impact. Housing them is easy. We use brown paper towel, just moistened with a spritz of water, and then we feed them mealworms, waxworms, chopped up pinkies, the adults. In breeding them, they are burying beetles, so we breed them in planter buckets, 5-gallon buckets. We usually use laboratory reared quail or rats. Between 140, 160 grams is what we like to use in the lab. Again, very cheap. I can steal the buckets from our horticulture department. The plexiglass is cheap, and the rocks are free. So, you know, this breeding program has allowed our staff and you know, our partners to, you know, again, the low cost of it, the limited space needed makes it an ideal project for small zoos, small institutions that want to get involved in conservation. It gives us the opportunity to view behaviors that aren't commonly seen in the wild. This species is hard to study. We don't know what it does when it's not underground with the brood. We don't know where it winters. We don't know where it's spending its time during the days if it's not secure in carrion. It gives us the opportunity to provide specimens for genetic material. We're seeing that our population here in the east is way different than the west genetically, and even in the west, the northern latitude populations are different genetically than, say, the Arkansas populations. So we try to keep them, we stud book them, we keep them genetically diverse as we can. We don't mix populations at this time. It's given us the opportunity to get a physiological profile on the species and just invertebrates, period. I mean, our vets have even come up with necropsy protocols to look at these animals if they die mysteriously. We're looking at parasite issues, nematodes, things like that, that we could transfer into wild populations or bring into the zoo that we don't want in the zoo. And it gives us the opportunity to provide the numbers of animals needed by the Fish and Wildlife Service for these reintroduction efforts and make a meaningful impact. And the protocols that have been developed for this species, both husbandry, reproduction, and field techniques, are used now widely across its range on other burying beetle projects and other species like tiger beetles and other invertebrate conservation initiatives that are starting to pop up now, other than pollinators. Releasing them, we don't just go over there and say, fly, be free. Again, another cheap, thing. We don't need helicopters and Land Rovers. We just need some deli cups, a cooler, and a shovel. We take them over to the island. We predetermine the pair based on genetics. And then we dig a hole. We actually put a quail in the hole. We put the pair in with the quail. We replace the turf plug over the top. We screen it, just make sure the crafty pros don't get into it. They haven't learned to spot our flagging. And then we go back in 11 days, as I said, that whole process from burial to the larva leaving, about 15 days. So we return in about 11 days to dig up 30% of the broods that we've provisioned, which gives us an idea of the success of the release, and then we can kind of extrapolate what we think our F1 population is going to be for that year. And this is typically what we like to see. We like to see mom still in there tending the brood, because they do continue to keep that carcass clean, keep it secreted. The males typically bail, 7 days out. They're like gone. They leave mom with the kids. But that's natural. They do that in the lab as well. So we like to see that. And then our monitoring for them, we usually typically go over in the early summer to monitor before the release, just to look for overwinter presence. Because every beetle we trap in the late summer, we mark it, which gives us an idea of what our overwinter survivorship is. And from 30 years of data from both Block Island and Nantucket, we're seeing that 75% of the population dies over winter naturally, right? So that 25% really need to find available carrion of a suitable size to keep this species going. So, not only is it a specialist and it requires certain stuff, it's got a lot of things going against it. Keep it on the landscape, which is challenging for us as conservationists. So our traps are basically pitfall traps. We use mason jars, wide mouth mason jars, on sale at Walmart. Urine cups as bait jars inside the traps, which the hospitals give to us when we go over and give them a really cool story about the beetle. And then we bait them with rotted chicken, and there is a recipe to rot the chicken. It can actually be too rotted or not rotted enough. You know it's right if it makes at least one intern projectile bomb. So here's what our trap grid looks like across the eastern half of Nantucket. Our original release site was here. All the beetles had gone here. We did do some releases in the west, but due to soil type, they didn't really seem to take on over there. So we concentrate mainly on the eastern half of the island. So we try to have a trap site, at least a quarter-mile increments in every direction from the original release site, just to look for distribution and abundance of the species. I had to get the rotten chicken in there. I wish this had smell-o-vision. We actually rebait the traps every 2 days, 2 to 3 days, because it does get very maggot infested and it becomes this frothy mess, and it actually doesn't effectively catch anymore. At that stage, we call it macaroni and cheese. Every beetle caught is weighed, measured, and marked. So we do elytral clips on the beetle. We have notch schemes for just about every site on the island, and we will use B tags too to mark individuals, so we know every single individual on the island and where that beetle came from. And then once we've, and we can track, of course, all environmental data, humidity, temperature. We even put eye buttons inside the broods to see what's inside, what's going on inside those brood chambers, humidity-wise, get information that might help us in the lab. And then once the trapping is over, we usually trap for a week to 2 week sessions. We hold every single beetle back until the end of the trapping, and then we pair them up based on where they were caught. We give them a quail. We go out there and do just like we do for the releases of the zoo red beetles to help bolster reproduction and numbers on the island. And we've been keeping track of all the other sylphids and Nicrophorus on the island as well, because we were wondering, here we're putting this iconic species back that used to be on Nantucket. Last one seen on Nantucket was 1927. Hadn't been one seen since. So we wanted to keep track of all the other carrion species on the island to see if we're causing any trends, both negative or positive, by putting this now larger carrying beetle into the landscape and throwing all this meat out there, and what is that doing? So I have enough data here to probably give 10 people PhDs if they ever want to look at it. We really haven't done anything with this, but just anecdotally, we're seeing differences and shifts of these species moving in different parts of the island. And so that's something I'd really like to delve in a little deeper someday. So the goal, of course, with any reintroduction project is a self-sustaining population, right? We want to be able to walk away and say, oh my God, we did it. So to do that, starting in 2011, when our population was booming, we said, all right, let's back off. Let's not hold their hand anymore. Let's see if they can find enough natural available carrion on the island to support the numbers that we've now produced there on the island. So instead of stopping altogether, we said, you know what, we're just going to, even if we catch 100 pairs, we're only going to provision 25 of those. And that's similar to what Block Island does every year. When they trap, they'll provision 25, and that's mainly to help bolster the numbers there, but also to allow us to collect our founder material for the breeding program. Because every year we take 10 pairs off of Block Island to start our breeding. We get 3 generations in the lab, and it's usually our second and third generations that get released out onto the island. So we did that, and we needed to know, is there enough natural available carrion on this island? I mean, carrion in the landscape, other than Rhode mortality, is a really hard thing to measure, right? So how do you measure that? We thought about using dogs, but now we're using stable isotopes, and that's really cool, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And we figured by doing this, it would give us a better comparison to what's going on in Block Island. So I know this is hard to see, but what this is telling you is 2011, right up to 2008, we lost about 83% of the population. We started to see it just stop to pummel on us. It was like, oh, geez. So that's when we partnered with Purdue University, started doing stable isotope work. And what's interesting is we can take a little electro clip of beetle, and through isotopes, it will tell us what that thing ate when it was a larva. So that's very important information to us as conservationists, and not only looking at additional release sites and suitable release sites, but why did they hang on Block Island, right? There was always this theory that it was the ringneck pheasant over there that was keeping that population on that island. And everybody was like, oh, and it is. It really was. And interesting. But we also found a lot of other cool things out there. They're now starting to utilize things outside of that weight range. We're seeing them using smaller fibers, less than 80 grams, and we're seeing them using animals larger than 180 grams. 200, we provisioned a pair on a city pigeon out there, and that was like 700-gram pigeon. I laughed, I really got to do with that. We went back and dug that thing up, and we pulled it out. The back half of the pigeon was completely taken over by maggots, and I said, it failed. And we pulled it out, and the beetles, typically they prepare the whole carcass like you saw. They hollowed out the breast cavity of the pigeon and was raising their brood inside the breast of the pigeon. Unheard of. So these things can adapt. We're starting to see some adaptation to their carrion preference and resource use, which gave us a little bit of hope. So I guess the takeaway from all this is we can establish and have established a pretty robust population of the species on Nantucket Island in both numbers and distribution. We're catching them at every site, and we still are to this day. But again, our recovery goal is self-sustaining population. There are 3 reintroduction efforts going on out west. St. Louis Zoo's reintroducing in Missouri. Cincinnati Zoo and the Wilds are releasing in Ohio with similar results of ours. So it's interesting. We're going to get them starting to use the stable isotope work, but we still haven't created a self-sustaining population of the species anywhere within this range to this date. Again, that 2011 to 2016 step away resulted in 83% loss of the population, which hurt, but we learned from it, and now we know that we need to hold their hand, and it doesn't take a lot of resource, like I said, for us to go out to Nantucket every year, breed the beetles in the lab, take them out there, supplement with zoo-bred beetles, and provision with carrion. And by doing that, we're now growing that population back up to those pre-2011 numbers. And, you know, one of the pressures that this beetle is facing now, like every species we've heard about today, is climate change, right? And being an island species, you know, they're very prone to stochastic events, storms. You know, during the breeding season, heavy rains will flood them out and destroy a whole breeding population. And of course, sea level rise, what is that going to do? These islands might not even be here in another 75 or 100 years. Out west, we're seeing it's getting too hot for them. And then invasive species threaten this guy. And out west, the big issue is fire ants. Fire ants just will go into a brood, kill the beetles, and take over the carrion. So they do have a lot of stressors, some that we're not dealing with here, but some we're certainly looking at. We're trying to answer that question, how much suitable carrion is in the landscape, so we're continuing to do stable isotope work, and again, seeing that they are utilizing species, and we haven't defined down that we can tell if it's a seed-eating bird, an insectivorous bird, if it's a Norway rat, a chipmunk, a red squirrel. So that data has been very, very beneficial for us to continue our planning going forward. So at this point, I think we're going to need to continue to supplement these populations with zoo-bred beetles and continue to throw the carrion out there for them if we're going to want to keep this thing on the planet. And it's all about research, right? We're still doing it. You know, we're looking at ways to track these things. You know, the isotope work is great. We still need to do more genetic work to determine how genetically distinct they are. You know, what alleles might be the ones that save these things in climate change. You know, they used to take Arkansas beetles to rear in the lab to release in Ohio, and they weren't having any success with that. But now if they can take Nebraska beetles, they're having much better luck. So we need to look into all that, because I think that may be the key in the future. And we got international recognition when Jane Goodall contacted me, heard about this beetle, heard about its story, heard about the conservation initiative, and she wrote a whole chapter in that book about the burying beetle. So it helped us gain some international recognition, which was really cool, and Jane and I are great friends to this day because of that. And even more importantly, and we've talked about, and you know, Brian's a great example of doing this, inspiring the next generation, right? We try to use burying beetles in our education programs. This group of middle school students from the St. Michael's Country Day School in Newport met an American burying beetle through our Zoomobile and learned that Rhode Island was the one of only 6 states that didn't have an official state insect, right? So they got a legislator to back a bill. They put together a PowerPoint. I was their consulting scientist, but I didn't have to do anything. They did it all. They put on their little suits and dresses and went to the State House and set their case in front of the House and the Senate. And there's Governor Raimondo signing the bill, making the American burying beetle now the official Rhode Island state insect, right next to coffee milk in calamari. You always hear about calamari and coffee milk. I hear about burying beetles. They need to do a better job at promoting it. I want to see 7-foot burying beetles in the airport next to the crop. Again, it takes a village, a lot of partners, a lot of volunteers, a lot of support to keep this little bug on the planet. Can't thank them enough for all their support, all they do. Hannah here. Hannah's my main right-hand lady that does all the breeding for us at the zoo. She can crank out American burying beetles. So if you want to know anything about beetles, she's your expert. And my Halloween costume. Uh-oh. Have you got any pushback from Nantucket? No, not at all. They embrace it. They love it. That's fantastic. Same on Block Island. It's kind of like our iconic species. Lots of support. This one's here also being studied and supported this way. Tiger beetles is one we're looking at. Of course, butterfly species, frosted elephants. So yes, there is we're looking at it. As you probably all have seen and read, we're in this great loss of insect diversity globally right now, and it's not just pollinators. So I think insects, and I'd like to think this species has been a flagship for that. So yes, I think we're going to see more and more going down the road. Since it hasn't been on Nantucket for 100 years, what ecological niche is it filling on the island today? How does it compare to that of the natural population? It's filling the same niche. It's taking that level of carrion out of the landscape. Are the other beetles able to do it? Yes, but they all have their own roles. Some are diurnal, some are nocturnal, some are seasonally active in the spring, some are seasonally active in the summer. So yeah, it's like a bicycle wheel, right? Every spoke is a species, right? It runs true. You can take a couple of spokes out, you're going to be able to ride the bike. You take too many out, that wheel's going to wobble. Take one too many out, the wheel's going to collapse, right? I want all the spokes in my wheel, and that beetle is one of them. How do they survive over winter? We don't know. We do know through overwintering and marked recapture studies that most of them die over winter. We don't know where they overwinter. So is snowfall important to these species to insulate them? We don't know. There's still, the more we know, the less we know, and I do a lot of these projects for a lot of different taxa, from rattlesnakes to rabbits to turtles. They're all different. And last one, how do I make a pitfall trap for beetles? Mason jar. Put it in the ground and bait it with rotten chicken and they will come. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Lou. Okay, next up we have Kate McPherson. Kate is Save the Bay's Narragansett Bay Riverkeeper, a wetland scientist and steward of the watershed. Kate feels at home in nature and will often point out cool plants and animals to unsuspecting friends while on the trail. That's the best kind of friend. She makes her home in the Woonasquatucket River watershed. Welcome, Kate.
Thanks, Darcy. So, like Darcy said, I am trained as a wildlife biologist, so all of the talks here today have been super interesting and wonderful. I think I'm the only one who's not talking about a wildlife species. I'm going to talk about a plant species today. And it's a little bit out of my wheelhouse because it is an upland plant species. So, without further ado, we're obviously in the Narragansett Bay watershed. This particular plant that I'm going to talk about is in the Woonasquatucket River watershed in eastern Gloucester. And so this is, I love aerial photographs, and this is an aerial photograph from 2008. I was a young homeowner. My husband Keith and I had just purchased about 3 acres of land in Gloucester. I knew I wanted to live somewhere where wood thrushes would be singing. We checked out this house in the winter, and I nailed it. In the spring, we got wood thrushes. But we also inherited about half an acre of non-native invasive species, and that's sort of outlined in red there. And underneath these non-native invasive species, so first of all, as a lover of biodiversity, I knew the non-native invasives had to go. So things like bittersweet, things like multiflora rose, Morrow's honeysuckle, burning bush, all of the stuff, you name it, is there. And then also some species that are native to the region that were just growing completely out of control. So things like raspberry canes, blackberry canes, and wild grape. They were just completely taking over this area. So as a brand new homeowner, I don't even think I had a mower at the time. I certainly didn't have a brush hog. I was completely overwhelmed, and so I dealt with it by ignoring it for a good 7 years. I put down cardboard just to try and get a path out to this hillside, and it was completely overgrown within weeks. So I knew I needed to bring in some professional help. I contacted a certified invasive species removal. You can find a list of certified invasive species managers on the Coastal Resources Management Council. I found someone with a cool name and I hired them. So they did some very targeted foliar herbicide treatment, and then we piled up the plants, I burned them, and eventually got to where we are here. I'll get to the good photos though. So this is a giant pile of sticks in my backyard. That pile was probably 15 feet tall, featuring my good friend Folsom there, supervising our work. Once all the plants were dead, I had my neighbor come in with his tractor, made 3 big piles, and I waited until my husband was not at home and I burned them all. And then, lo and behold, so prior to this, I had seen this cool little white flower sort of poking in underneath the raspberry canes. I saw like maybe a dozen of them, but I couldn't really get there. It was really picky. I put on my field gear, my chaps, and I didn't really know what it was, but it was one of the earliest spring bloomers. There's another, the bird made a big impression on me. I don't have any pictures of this back property because I was so overwhelmed and kind of ashamed of it, so that when I finally dealt with it, I was like, look what we did. So I had found Bloodroot. So I was like, oh, Bloodroot. Where have I heard of Bloodroot before? It's got kind of a cool name, Bloodroot, kind of evoking, not quite as evoking as the burying beetle, but you know, like a little bit of a Halloween-y vibe. And I had known that, let's get ahead here. The Natural Heritage Database has these sort of generalized maps of where uncommon and rare plants and animals can be found throughout Rhode Island. Now, a little bit of background on me, I'm a wetland biologist and worked for the state of Rhode Island in the freshwater wetlands permitting program for about 14 years. So I relied pretty heavily on these maps when reviewing freshwater wetland applications. Because anywhere where you know that there are rare plant and animal species, if there's anything you can do to protect as much of that habitat as you can, if it's in DEM's jurisdictional area, if it's near a stream or a bog or any type of wetlands, because if there are known rare plants and animals there, it's generally an indicator of high quality habitat. You want to protect that as much as you can. So I went to the database, and sure enough, Bloodroot is listed as a species of concern in Rhode Island. So what is a species of concern? Well, it's not an endangered species. It just means that there are few populations, and the populations that are known about it have potentially to be in trouble. And so once I knew that I had some bloodroot on my property, I was like, okay, well, I'm not gonna step on it, I'm not gonna burn it if it's blooming. I continue to, so anytime, who here has ever like tried to cut down a multiflora rose? Yeah. So you can't just cut it down. It's a labor of hate. You have to keep cutting it. You have to keep cutting it. You maybe have to apply a little herbicide. You have to really, really stay on these species, these non-native invasive species, for a really long time. So once I knew I had some bloodroot on my property, I had happened upon this article that was documenting Rhode Island's rare plant and animal species and how we don't really have very good laws on the books that protect any of these species unless they're federally endangered. And so I contacted David Gregg and I was like, you know, I've got this bloodroot, I don't think it's on the map, do you want to know about it? How can I help increase the biodiversity of Rhode Island's bloodroot populations? And at the time, who remembers Rhode Native? Any Rhode Native folks? Yeah, Rhode Native was a great program. So at the time they were taking in plant material, growing native ecotype plants so that folks could either buy them or folks doing wetland restorations or any habitat type restoration. I'm so used to saying wetland restoration, it just comes out of my mouth. Folks can take those plants and really use them in a positive way. But it was a very limited operation, a beautiful greenhouse, but not a very big one. And so it sort of went away. talked a little bit about this. Bloodroot's only a species of concern. At the time when I contacted David, I thought that there were only 6 populations, but he checked the database. There are 18 places, but most of them were just sort of historic observations, where somebody saw some in the woods and maybe didn't go back to check. And, you know, time goes by and there aren't a whole lot of state resources dedicated to documenting where our rare species are. So if you don't check, then you don't know. And then also Bloodroot is pretty valuable. It's been used culturally for medicinal purposes. And if you do a Google search or a Amazon search for Bloodroot, I mean, this is what comes up. You can get dried root, Appalachian harvest, $38 a pound. You can get tinctures, who knows what's in that bottle. You can get some paprika. So, you know, so folks, and it's distinctive. It looks like a daisy. It's one of the first ephemeral wildflowers to pop up in the spring. It comes up with the crocuses before my daffodils come up. And it's just really a striking plant. So now that the non-natives are gone, there's plenty of room. My population has exploded since I did the arborist-assisted non-native invasive species removal. But where did this population come from? So we're going to go way back. Anybody skilled in aerial photo interpretation? Anybody want to guess what was growing on my property in 1939? Just yell it out. Apple trees. So western Smithfield is Apple Valley, and I'm in eastern Gloucester. A stone's throw away from Rhode Island's largest apple orchard, Sear Orchard. My whole neighborhood was apple trees. I wish they had left just one, and that I could have like a 300-year-old apple tree. I have no apple trees. It's the saddest thing. And so I've outlined these stone walls as sort of delineate, not the whole property, but the area of concern. A couple decades later, we have 1972, and you can see that it's been grown in. These are eastern red cedars that have mostly repopulated. And pay attention to the green arrow. The green arrow is kind of on a steeping slope. And my house was built in 1974, so they cleared a big area. They obliterated that beautiful stone wall for my septic system, and then left it for 30 years. So we had trees growing over the septic system, which I'm sure is great for that system. And then shortly before we bought it, they cleared the area again. So it was fallow for about 3 years, and I'm guessing that's when the majority of the non-native invasive species came in. 3 good years, really, really thick shrub growth. I had bittersweet vines, this big around. For young folks that might be getting property, I know it seems impossible, it might happen though. Don't cut the bittersweet vine, treat it with herbicide, because you'll get 500 little bittersweet vines in place of the one. That's my advice. You don't cut it. It's going to be so satisfying, and it's going to haunt you for 15 years. So taking a look at the green arrow here and flipping back through, although most of Rhode Island was cleared, you know, since Europeans settled here, the green arrow is on a fairly steep slope, so it probably wasn't ever grubbed. Maybe it was cleared, maybe sheep were in there and grazing as pasture. We know a lot of these ephemeral wildflowers really can't handle a whole lot of disturbance to the undergrowth, and so I think my remnant population hung out underneath the remaining cedars that you can see in the 2008 photograph there, and just spread when I sort of intentionally was tending to their needs. And it's really not super intentional. I don't do a whole lot with this back area. I don't even think I have a good photo of it, but I weed whack it once a year, and I try not to step on the bloodroot. That's about it. I do hand pruning, so I've got my loppers, I've got my hand pruners. If I'm really upset about something, I'll go out and I'll physically uproot as many plants as I can. 2020 was a great year for invasive removal, let me tell you. I was on my game in 2020. Here's a list of some of the prime suspects of species that have come in that I actively manage for. I also am trying to create shade in that half-acre patch, obviously not on the septic system. It's a bad idea to plant trees on the septic system. You want to be at least 10 feet from the edge of your leach fields. But all around the septic system, I've planted native trees. Last year, I did my annual weed whack. So in 2023, I did my annual weed whack in the spring, and I don't think it worked that great. I'm gonna wait until the first frost and then weed whack after the fall. Some of you pollinator experts, please come talk to me and make sure that I'm on the right track. Because as I said, I'm not a bloodroot expert. I just happen to be the very fortunate inheritor of a small piece of land that happens to have a decent population on it. But there is quite a lot of wild grape that really gets in the area, and I'm thinking a fall weed whack is going to be a little bit more effective than a spring weed whack. You should see the crafts I make with the wild grape, though. They're beautiful because there's so many of them. And then I just avoid pulling invasives in the bloodroot patch whenever it's up there. And so I happened to notice the bloodroot, and I used a field guide because I'm trained as a wildlife biologist and wetland biologist. But today, like more than ever, folks can use their phones and use things like iNaturalist. I just use Google Lens to identify things that I might not know about. There are lots of plant apps out there, and it's so much more accessible today than it ever has been. So I encourage everybody, if you see a cool plant, you're like, oh, I wonder what this is. Snap a picture, send it to a friend, or use iNaturalist. I found out the 2016 list of rare plants available on Rhode Island Natural History Survey.org. Bloodroot is still listed as a species of concern, so it hasn't been upgraded, it hasn't been downgraded, it's still totally unprotected. But it makes me happy, and it's a rare plant, and I want to share it. So for the past 2 years, I've been partnering with the Rhode Island Wild Plant Society. They have sort of stepped into that Rhode native niche, and I have a really robust population. If I pull up a big old strand of Japanese knotweed, I'll get 6 bloodroot. I feel kind of bad about it, so so I'll give them those plants. They are great sellers at the annual spring sale. And this year I experimented with harvesting seeds. So there's a really cool seed mechanism that these plants have. So on this photograph, you can see the little white shiny coating on there. Turns out that's fats and lipids. Fats and lipids are fats and sugars are like candy bars. So they're wrapped in candy bars. Ants will take these seeds, eat the candy coating, and bring them down into their burrows and essentially plant the bloodroot population. So in my experiments with collecting seeds and giving some seeds to volunteers with the Rhode Island Wild Plant Society, these are kind of tricky to get to germinate. I think it takes 2 years. There may or may not be some sort of biological pairing with the ants, like maybe the ants scarify or scratch up the surface of the seeds a little bit when they're eating that coating. Like I said, I'm not an expert. I just want to try and help spread the plant a little bit. So seed starting might not be the best way, but it's still a really interesting way to try and spread this population because these seeds were produced through sexual reproduction, so the genetics are pretty good. We could also section up those tubers. If you chop up the tubers and replant them, that's going to be more like a clone. So it might be useful in getting more plants, but not more individuals. Because of BioBlitz this year, BioBlitz happened to sort of coordinate timing-wise with when my bloodroot seeds were producing seeds. So I gave folks at the Narragansett Indian Tribe some bloodroot because I know culturally it's used in traditional medicine, and Charlestown seems like a great place to me for bloodroot to be growing. It should be growing throughout all of our hardwoods in Rhode Island. It's a species that should be here. So with that, I'm still sort of like in the experimental phase of how can we move bloodroot, how can we preserve what we have, and I'd love, like if any other folks have seen, I've personally have never seen bloodroot in the wild apart from in my backyard. So if you know of where any patches are, maybe we can work together to try and figure out exactly, what they like in Rhode Island. So I'll take questions. How big are the flowers? So the flowers look pretty much like daisies. They look like tiny little daisies. They grow maybe 8 inches off the ground. If you break the stem, the cool thing about bloodroot is that it oozes this reddish orange kind of sap. It's not really bloody. It's not that gory. It's more like rusty. But they come up, they flower for a couple of days, like those March days where you're like, oh my goodness, spring is here, then the bloodroot comes out. And it sticks around. The leaves are really interesting and palmate, so it looks like a palm. And the leaves will stick around until August, September, but they're kind of tender, and this time of year I have a lot of other plant species that grow up next to it, so they're pretty buried at this point. Am I interested in fostering other rare plants? That seems like a big deal, and I would hate to kill them. Not a botanist, keep in mind. Freshwater wetland biologist. That being said, one thing that I have noticed is I will give friends plants. These bloodroot that I've given to friends don't seem to survive very well, and I'm not sure why. So I would want to make sure that I have the right habitat for another rare plant before taking it out. I'd rather give it to an expert. What sort of habitat would I need to propagate them? I can tell you about my habitat. I have really well-draining soils. The sun, it's part sun, part shade, so they're growing underneath that fairly thick canopy of eastern red cedar, but they're also growing in that really wide open area that doesn't have a lot of trees. Now it's down in a hollow, so it never really gets direct sun for a very long time. And I would even say my soil quality is probably not great. I have a lot of those Asian jumping worms. So the soil's I would say the primary, the most distinctive factor of the soil is that it's really well drained. I don't know anything about ants, so I haven't tried to identify any ants. Ant team next year at BioBlitz. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a good rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, Kate. Okay, next up is Dr. David Hibbett. David is the Andrea and Peter Klein Professor of Biology at Clark University. He received a Bachelor of Science from UMass Amherst and a PhD from Duke University, and held postdoctoral appointments at the Tottori Mycological Institute in Japan and the Harvard University Herbaria. David was also my undergraduate and graduate thesis advisor at Clark, and I'm so pleased to have him here today. A few of our speakers have referred to genetics, and David is going to challenge us to think a bit deeper about evolutionary biology in this talk.
Thanks, everybody. It's really awesome to be here. Perfect. Thanks. Okay. Thank you, Darcy. It's really cool to be here. This has been an incredibly diverse set of talks. I've learned a lot, and I feel really privileged to be part of this celebration of biodiversity. So thank you, Darcy, and the other organizers for the invitation to be here. So I'm a mycologist, and I'm proud to be representing the kingdom of fungi today. And I'm going to tell you a story today mostly about just one species. It's my very favorite species of mushrooms on the whole planet. It's this thing, Lentinus tigrinus, also called the tiger sawgill. And I've been working on this thing for a long time. I'm going to give you a little background on some earlier work, and then I'm going to tell you about a project that we're just trying to get off the ground, just trying to launch now, taking advantage of some new genomic techniques that are available to us. The cool thing about, well, all mushrooms are cool, but the really cool thing about Lentinus tigrinus is that this is a dimorphic mushroom. So it comes in two forms in nature. The one on the right we call the agaricoid form. It has gills, exposed gills, and it releases spores into the air just like a normal typical mushroom. And then the form on the left, which is called the secotioid form, it doesn't have exposed gills. The spore-producing structures are concealed within this permanent layer of tissue that will never open. This thing traps the spores inside the fruiting body, and they slowly sift out later as the fungus falls apart, gets eaten by bugs or whatever. So it's a polymorphic mushroom. As far as I'm aware, it's the only one that exists. And one of the reasons that I'm so obsessed with this species is because it has the potential to maybe give us some ideas about the evolution of a kind of fungi called gastromycetes. And this is a group of fungi that have evolved many times. They all produce their spores inside the fruiting body, so like puffballs, earth stars, stinkhorns, things like that. They make their spores inside the fruiting body, not on the surface. These things are really weird, even to a mycologist. And prior to the advent of molecular techniques in fungal evolution, understanding how they evolved and what they were related to was really tricky. We now have a pretty good idea about where these things come from. We've got lots of molecular data. This is a very large evolutionary tree of the mushroom-forming fungi, about 8,000 species in this tree. The red branches and dots represent the gastroid lineages, so various groups of gastromycetes. So we know from this analysis that these gastroid forms, puffballs and so on, have evolved at least 123 times. So we have a pretty good idea of where they are in the fungal tree of life. We have a pretty good idea of what their closest relatives are, but we don't know how they've arisen. We don't know what are the developmental bases of these transitions or the ecological conditions that promote that. There's one group of fungi that might give us some clues, some ideas. These are the so-called secotioid fungi. So I mentioned there's a secotioid form of Lentinus tigrinus. This is a panel showing you several groups of secotioid fungi which are gastromycetes that actually still resemble closely related fungi that produce their spores externally. So they look like they're not, they're on their way to being a puffball or something, but they're not quite there yet. And they've evolved in multiple lineages. And because of fungi like this, we've developed sort of models for the evolution of these gastromycetes, shown in this cartoon here. And the basic idea is that first there's some kind of macromutation, one or a few mutations that give you an enclosed fruiting body. So a few genetic changes, a very large phenotypic effect, followed by sort of more classical evolutionary changes, many, many changes in genes, a small effect that give you a refined gastromycete, like a puffball or something like that. So the thing that's cool about the secotioid form of Lentinus tigrinus, shown here, is that it looks exactly like what we envision the early stages in the evolution of a gastromycete. So this might be on its way to being a puffball or something. And this is grown in my lab, so these are mushrooms that you can grow in your lab very easily. And because they're fungi, we can collect the spores, we can grow the haploid forms, do genetics, do crosses. This is the very high-tech mushroom growing chamber in my laboratory. It's a converted deli fridge with a controller, CO2 and humidity meter, and a vaporizer and exhaust and so on. And so here they are growing in my lab. And so we can do genetics on them. And from having done genetic analyses of tigrinus, we know that that secotioid form, that puffball-like enclosed form, it appears to be conferred by just a single gene. Now we have no clue what that gene is. It could be a point mutation, it could be a big super gene, we have no idea, but it's inherited in a very simple form, looks like a single locus, and we would like very much to know what that gene is and how it works. Okay, so that's kind of background on why I'm obsessed with Lentinus tigrinus. But what is Lentinus tigrinus? This is a map from GBIF showing collections and observations that have been reported as this species, mainly North America, Europe, Middle East, Asia. A lot of those reports in the tropics and in Australasia and East Asia we think are misidentifications because mushroom ID is hard and people get it wrong, even professional mycologists. So to try to get a handle on what tigrinus really is, we did what we do in my lab, which is to do a phylogenetic analysis. So we got all the publicly accessible sequences that we could of the genus Lentinus. Here's the big old tree. The section Tigrini that includes Tigrinus and relatives is expanded. The other parts of the genus are in those collapsed triangles. And there's four groups that we recognize in this section, which we've labeled A, B, C, D. A and D correspond to what people have called Lentinus tigrinus. So at least two lineages of tigrinus. And I'm going to just show you first D and then A. And we'll ignore B and C because they're not Lentinus tigrinus. So here's group D. And just notice the distribution. So Europe, Middle East, as far east as into India and so on. And this is the real Lentinus tigrinus. And I say that because this species was described in France in almost 240 years ago. This is the type illustration from Bouillard of the tiger agaric, which is where this tiger sogule name comes from. So that lineage that's the real tigrinus. Group A is almost exclusively North American, with a few sequences from the Philippines and Russia. So those may be cases of long-distance dispersal, maybe human-mediated. That's a hypothesis, which we know has happened repeatedly in mushrooms, but it's mainly North American. So this is going to require a new name. So this thing that we call Lentinus tigrinus here, eventually, we're probably going to need to hang a new species name on it, and everybody's going to need to learn another new name for mushrooms, and the amateur mycologists will resent me for that. Okay, the secodioid form of tigrinus only occurs in North America. It's only here. It's not in Europe and Asia. This is a summary of data from iNaturalist, so almost 900 records, and about a quarter of them are this secodioid form. Those are the green dots, and the rest are the agaricoid form. So my interpretation of this is it looks like this is a form that has evolved uniquely in North America, maybe just a single mutation somewhere in some population. And it has done well, right? It has spread all over eastern North America, which is the range of this species. So this polymorphism exists at the local level and all across eastern North America. And I am very interested to know why. Why do we have this polymorphism? Why do these two forms co-occur? Why do they persist? To get at that question, now we're transitioning to the work that I have hoped to do, or we're starting to do. We're going to be looking at sort of population level samples in a couple of places. One population that we've targeted is in Illinois. This is on the Chicago River. This is a map from iNaturalist showing observations in Illinois. And we've had a lot of support from the Illinois Mycological Association, which is one of many amateur mycology clubs all over the country, people who are really passionate about mushrooms and who really are very important for helping us understand the distribution of species. So the IMA has been great. They've offered to help us. They've already sent us some collections. We've also found, obviously, local populations. One good population that we found is at Great Meadows National Wildlife Refuge in Concord, Massachusetts, on the banks of the Concord River. Unfortunately, the Fish and Wildlife Service declined our application for a special use permit to collect mushrooms. So evidently, it's okay to shoot coyotes and ducks and bears at Great Meadows, but you can't pick mushrooms for research purposes. But there's another population that we found on the Ipswich River in Topsfield, Massachusetts, which is in the Ipswich River Nature Sanctuary of the Mass Audubon Society. Mass Audubon has been fantastic. They've given us a permit to collect. We've been out there collecting a lot. Last weekend we were up there leading mushroom foray on the property, and this has been a really important partnership for us. They occur elsewhere in New England. They're not widely reported because the places where these things grow are not the places where people usually go mushroom hunting. But here's a report from not too far from here by Dina Thomas, who is here. This is from the Rhode Island Mycological Society, which has this very nice table out here. So another one of these local mushroom clubs. Okay, a little bit more on the habitat. Now you may have noticed that we were in canoes collecting these fungi, and that's because this mushroom has a really weird habitat for a mushroom. It grows on hardwoods, almost always silver maple, Acer saccharoion, and it grows on, you can find it in upland locations, but usually you find it on wood that is emergent from water, sometimes in the water or on the riverbank. Here's my PhD student Thomas Rail making some collections at Ipswich River. You can see the mushrooms on the log there. And we've noticed that it likes to fruit right at water level. So this is in Concord. You can see the algae on the substrate there. So it fruits right at the edge of the water. And we've observed that it seems to like to fruit right at the edge of the water as the waters recede. So you can see the older mushrooms up high, younger mushrooms down low. The yellow circle is a little primordium. It's just coming up. So that seems to be what it does. As the water levels drop, the mushrooms pop out. And this is a very risky strategy because the water levels do not only fall, they rise, and they can rise unpredictably. So here's a map or graph showing you water levels in the Ipswich River, where we're doing our field work, over the last 2 years. The blue shaded boxes are the fruiting seasons for Tigrinus, and it's out from late May into October. It's a very broad fruiting season. You all remember last year, it was absolutely horrible. We had this terrible drought. Water levels just plummeted in the Ipswich River. And then late in the fall, or into October, we got a lot of rain. Water levels came up again. 2023 this year has been completely different. We've just been deluged with water. The water levels in the Ipswich River are very, very high, and there have been these wild fluctuations with rain. So Tigrinus mushrooms fruiting near the level of water are susceptible to inundation. And we observed this. So here's October of last year. There's 2 mushrooms here. One has been completely submerged. The other is high and dry for the moment. And here are some pictures from June of this year in Ipswich. So you can see that these mushrooms are partly underwater. So I've come to regard this as a semi-aquatic mushroom. That is a weird concept. It's a semi-aquatic mushroom. So this all has me thinking about, why is it that we have this polymorphism in this species? Why do we have these 2 forms side by side? A mushroom has only one function, right? And its sole function is to liberate spores. That's all it does. These 2 forms have got to have wildly different spore dispersal properties. One releases spores into the air, the other one traps them in the fruiting body for potentially a very long time. So we speculate that these 2 forms have different performance properties, different fitnesses, and furthermore that those performances may vary depending on whether the mushroom is submerged or exposed to the air. So I hypothesize that the agaricoid form on the right might have superior performance when it's exposed, releasing spores into the air like a normal mushroom, whereas the secodioid form on the left might be more tolerant of being submerged. So it might be adaptive, might have adaptive significance for this very weird habitat, this odd niche that it has, that it seems to flourish in. And so we have a couple of hypotheses about why it is that we have this polymorphism that's maintained. Why isn't one form won out over the other? And the first one is that the secodioid form is under positive selection, meaning that it's selectively favored. Somehow it's better, it has better performance in the agaricoid form. And this polymorphism that we're seeing now is transient in sort of evolutionary terms. And if you come back in 1 million years or so, maybe we'll only have the secotioid form of Lentinus tigrinus. So in population genetics lingo, we would say there's an ongoing selective sweep. The other hypothesis that I think is more intriguing and maybe also more plausible is that some kind of balancing selection is going on, and that this stochastic variation in water levels, stochastic change in the environment, may promote the coexistence of both forms. And if that's true, then this gene, whatever it is, variant that encodes the secotioid form, it might be very old, and we might be able to discriminate these two hypotheses using population genetics. So those are the hypotheses. Our next steps are, if we can shake loose some money from the National Science Foundation, we'll be doing phylogenomics of Lentinus section tigrini. We'll be doing what are called genome-wide association studies to try to identify that locus. And then we'd like to do population genetics to try to address those two selective hypotheses. Here are some references for some of the work in the past, some of it in the distant past. Here are people who have worked on this project. So some of the current team members are there. On the lower right is Sophie Irons, who is here. So if you have questions about this project, you can ask Sophie. Again, I want to thank Mass Audubon, the Illinois Mycological Association. Also, Clark University has provided some funds for this work. And if you'd like to learn more about the project, maybe get involved by helping us locate more populations or collecting specimens, or if you just want to see more pretty pictures of mushrooms, you can go there. We have stickers that we would be happy to give you. And thank you. We're happy to take questions. This is interesting what you're doing with questions. Are they coming from the room here?
Yes, they are. Yes.
I would also accept them through the, however you wish.
You've got plenty here, so.
Oh, yeah, great. Did people think there were two species at one time? Actually, not only did people think there were two species, for a while they were thought to be two different genera. They're that just different, but we now know that they're absolutely the same species. They're mating compatible. You find them side by side in nature. So it's one polymorphic species. Do you transplant any of your mushrooms to the wild? No, but we'd like to do some experiments to try to get at this spore dispersal performance stuff. That would be cool. Great to see other forms of life. Yes. Is one morph more likely to be found close to water? That's a fantastic question. That would be very hard to get at because it's a mushroom, and so we could do transects, but would we find enough mushrooms? But yes, that's a great question. What type of permit do you need to collect these mushrooms? I hope that was not an offensive remark, but it's a special use permit that you apply for to the Fish and Wildlife Service. I think they're just so overwhelmed with work that we're not giving up. Mass Audubon has its own process, and they were very cooperative. Can you do an experiment to document that they have varying fitness due to submergence? Yeah, fantastic question. We have some ideas about stuff we could do in the lab with mushrooms and water and so on. I know my student Thomas, who I showed you earlier, is very interested in that. And I think that's all the questions. Anything else? Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, David. We have a couple of more talks for you today. Let me get up the right one. Okay, next up is Dr. Numi Mitchell. Numi has extensive international experience working with endangered, threatened, or rare species, including rock iguanas, pangolins, wood rats, and the New England cottontail. Her research focuses on wildlife ecology and resource use, particularly the identification of critical resources for the species that she studies. Numi developed and has led the Narragansett Bay Coyote study since 2004. Welcome, Numi.
Aquatic, anybody involved with conservation. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Okay. I tend to wander. But anyway, just speculate. Okay. All right. Well, so I work for with the Conservation Agency in Jamestown, and it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense if you think about working with rare species all over the place, and suddenly I start working with coyotes. And I also wonder, when they asked me to do this talk, why it should be included in the biodiversity section. But hopefully by the end of this talk, I will tell you, explain those things to you. I have a secret agenda involving biodiversity. Okay, so coyotes are native, first of all. And I get a lot of flack because we also have information lines and stuff. People ask, what are they doing here? What they're doing here involves the eradication of the wolf. We used to have a top predator right through half the 1700s. We even had bounties on it in Rhode Island. And so in response to the eradication of wolves, coyotes started moving their way across the country. And by about 1960, they got to Rhode Island to the displeasure of some of the inhabitants. All right. What is this stuff? Okay. Can I do this? And then gesticulate? Thank you. Okay. Coyotes, as the replacement of the wolf, perform an important function. They're predators and scavengers. And the most important thing about coyotes is they eat whatever's easy. In a natural situation, they'll eat meadow voles and deer, fawns they like in particular, carcasses in the winter, and woodchucks, favorite item. They live in packs. These are the things that we knew going in and that were useful. So I picked out 4 things that really helped us when we started out. I neglected to say that people have tried to manage coyotes since big time, since the 70s. And trapping, shooting, all methods of lethal control, poisoning, and nothing worked across the country. But these facts lead me to believe, or led us to believe when we started this, that it would be possible to manage coyotes in a different way. Okay, so given that, we know what they eat. They live in family groups, and there are other types of coyotes that are called transients. The family groups are resident coyotes that are territorial, and they defend those territories from invading coyotes of any kind. So the other thing about top predators, which coyotes have become in Rhode Island, again because of the absence of wolves, is they control their own population based on food. So these facts are the most important thing, because just thinking about it, if they control their population based on food, well, what are they eating? And that's what we decided to address, because people started really getting upset about coyotes in the 1990s, and I had nothing to do. My kid was in Montessori school, and they wouldn't let me take him to the Turks and Caicos, where I was working on iguanas. So I started to work on coyotes. And, this just made common sense to me. If food controls numbers, what are they eating? What if we were lucky enough to figure it out? And so that's when we put the GPS collars on them and started following them around. All right, so the first years, it became very clear, and I really knew nothing about coyotes, but you can look at this map. Each color code is a different pack of coyotes, and you can see how they space themselves. Everything's quite neat. See the lines between packs? Some packs have larger territories, some smaller. We noticed that. And there seems to be a DMZ in between, you know, where the coyotes don't go. And then there's some contention sometimes. So it's neat as a pin, and this is all through summer. I'm sorry, that's all through winter, sorry. And, summertime through December. And in late fall, sorry, I got myself mixed up. In late fall, everything goes to hell in a handbasket because transients get kicked out of the packs. The transients at this point are young of the year that have matured to the point that they're irritated. And the parents tell them to hit the road. So the pink dots in this entropic picture are transient coyotes, that's young female, and in the other island, which is Jamestown, the purple dots are another transient. You can see that they live in peripheral habitats trying to make a living. These guys are territorial. And so it's not a long-term plan. Transients have a very short lifespan, and that's an important part of our management plan. If we want to lower populations, we can leverage that, as people are fond of saying. Okay, so once we had the GPS collars on, we saw that. Then we noticed when we plotted it in 3D that there was huge areas of activity. These are GPS point locations, and in lots of different areas, the coyotes were spending a lot of time. This is one particular pack in Satch West that I'm going to track for you as we go through our study. But we would go to those mountains and we figure out what the big deal was. And the big deal, when you see something like that and you're tracking coyotes, it's going to be a food resource. This is 6 dead cows. And here, this is not atypical. It's on a farm. There's cattle death in the winter a lot. Farmers can't really bury their cows. They don't have a solution if they die. And so they lightly compost them. This was the biggest thing of all. In Rhode Island, deer are hit on the road. There are roughly 1,300 deer hit on the road every year. Yeah. And so that, no, 1,300, right? Sorry, I'm looking at data. And so there's a huge amount of meat. At 200 pounds of piece, that's a lot of meat. And people aren't cleaning up the deer at all. Was I got that number right? Order of magnitude? Yeah, just wanted to make sure. So moving the decimal point, it's about 130,000 pounds of meat available to coyotes on the roadsides if these animals aren't cleaned up. And so we went, holy smokes, think about it, they aren't cleaned up. And this is an animal that, more food, more puppies, right? Okay, so the other things that we found just blew our socks off. That were from everything from people to feeding intentionally to people feeding feral cats, thinking they were doing a big favor to the cats. Here a lady has put cat food in that tub. And the cats have the shift. Then the coyote has the shift. Then the coyote starts looking for the cats. All right, so the long and the short of it is, since we began our studies, we found that almost every pack is subsidized to some extent. And this by humans. And I count the deer in this because these are roadkill deer. So farm animals, composting, and feral cat feeding is actually quite important because it draws cats into urban areas where people will encounter them. So we found that this would necessarily create two problems. The first is a numbers problem, which I just explained. And really, there's a lot of literature on it. The females breed younger, the alpha female and alpha male have more puppies in each litter. There's a skewed sex ratio that occurs when there's more food. You get more females produced, because that's more uteruses to populate the earth. And so, of course, this is why lethal control doesn't work. You take out competitors for food, and suddenly the rest of the population rebounds, and the studies have shown 8 months, and it's back to no point. Hunting is fun. You can hunt them all you want from the perspective of DEM, but do not manage the population that way because you can't. Okay, so the other problem is like the feral cat problem I alluded to, where coyotes are coming in to residential areas. That was a high-density residential condo, and with feral cat feeding, and coyotes were there 24/7. So here's the multi-year example. That first picture I showed of 3D is this pack here, and these animals were all subsidized. And these are sort of a combination of natural and field experiments, because in some cases we were able to just observe what the situation was, whether they had anthropogenic food subsidies at the time we were tracking them, and then in other cases we were able to manipulate. So that was kind of neat. So here are 3 culprits, all subsidized from, this is Aquidneck Island. You guys recognize where that is? Satchwest Point? Okay, so the first one, Peckham. That's that pointy cone that I said we should go look at. What was underneath that was several deer and a bunch of sheep from the farmer across the street. He thought he'd get rid of his sheep there. In reality, he was training coyotes that loved lamb chops. And he had all sorts of problems. But at any rate, we observed this for a bit, and look at the size of that home range. The yellow dots show the extent, the turquoise dots show the extent of the movement of the first animal. And so we talked to the farmer, we talked to the hunter who was feeding deer, and said, you know, this is probably not cool. And so they stopped. The farmer had a monetary reason to stop because he was ruining his profit. And the hunter was cooperative. And so as soon as we removed that, we saw immediate changes in the territory size. Okay. And then we noticed that it stops. Let's see if I can get it here so I don't have to run around. Oh, there. Jeez, this is just what happens. All right, second drawing, top of the home range. There, we also found a farm there where they were putting restaurant garbage from Thames Street down to feed pigs. And this was a pretty regular thing. So we went and talked to them about it. And so that that resource was removed. Then again, we got a territorial expansion with the next coyote. And that looked pretty darn normal. Look at the difference. We have the same number of coyotes in the pack, and they have spread themselves over a much larger area. Ding, the lights went on. Maybe that's a way to reduce coyote density, because if they're territorial, they're pushing the other coyotes out. The other alternative is they're not strong enough to push other coyotes out. And then there's always an action and a response. And we wanted to see what that was as well. Fortunately, we had another coyote, blue dots, named Rhode, collar that was utilizing the garbage as well. One of the things we find is when there's a large resource, coyotes will all attempt to get a piece of the pie. Let me just show you what happened after we removed the resources. Okay, Rhode enlarges, buck enlarges, I think. And that shows the retreat. Light points are older points. And the animal retreats to the north because they aren't able to hold their ground as the Satchwest pack needs to expand. And in the end, the territory shifts. So that was really our first experiment. And what happened to that guy? Did you see how his points were all over the island? The coyote that was to the north was probably a low-ranking individual in the pack. And there wasn't enough for the family to eat. And so that animal was ousted from the pack. There's social intolerance, tension due to lack of food, and out goes that animal. And this picture is of him going to South Dartmouth Pass, where a very nice hunter shot him, not that person, but called me up. We have your collar. So that was an interesting story, and we were lucky to get that collar back. Okay, so in 2017, we teamed up with DEM. They were kind enough to fund us with a federal grant, Pittman Robertson, and we realized that we might be able to manage coyotes by managing resources. So we measured the territory size before and after we removed the subsidies. Some were existing, as I said, and some were manipulations. The other thing that was important to measure was how many animals are in the pack. Because if you have 3 animals here and you enlarge the territory, still have 3 animals, you've done a good job. You've lowered the density of coyotes per square inch. If other coyotes then join in, it's not going to work. If home range size is the thing that determines how many coyotes fit, it's not going to work. But fortunately, we found out that it's the first case that territories, the same number of animals stick with the pack as it expands. So we are, in fact, lowering density. And so here's some of, the title of the talk was Sherlock Watson and Clouseau. Those are coyotes. And this one is Clouseau, and he is showing us where 6 dead deer are in Newport. And I thought I'd show you this because, if I can get this to work. There's where the bodies were. This is what we go out with in the field, but usually just a week of data. This is pretty much all of Clouseau's data for the year. See where all the blue lines are sort of coming together? There's a radiating spoke. That is an indicator of nut. Well, blue is nut, red is day. So nighttime activity, repeated nights, boom. So that is a satisfied field assistant. He has 6 deer carcasses, and we can then shut down that feeding. It was a guy baiting coyotes. And so feeding them, and he was baiting them to bounty hunt them, to try to get rid of coyotes. Totally counterproductive. More food, more pups, right? It doesn't have to make sense. So I'm just going to show you data really quick. And but what we did was standard home range estimates, but the ones people tend to like are the middle one, 95% MCP, which if you can see the middle, read down, with large reliable food subsidies, 15 of our sample coyotes that we tracked for a year had a home range size of only 3.2 square miles. That's average, okay? All right, so thing to remember is 3 miles. Okay, these are small, unreliable anthropogenic food subsidies. That's like dumpster doors open, cat food on the porch one night, that kind of thing. Those had, so the first one is large, reliable, that's the key. And second is small, unreliable. Whoops, the territory goes up. All right, so where's that? Okay, small unreliable subsidies and the average territory size expands to 4 square miles. No subsidies, average territory size about 5 square miles. That's pretty significant because, this is me saying, we tested this so many different ways. We took 2-hour points only, we looked at all our points, we looked at 30 days. They are really responsive. They'll move in 30 days if you take away 6 deer carcasses. So it was all highly significant. So how is this significant to coyote management in Rhode Island, and then how is it significant to biodiversity? Okay, significant to management in Rhode Island. If we continue leaving out large, reliable, anthropogenic food subsidies for coyotes, as every best pocket farm in Rhode Island does, all the state leaves all its 1,300 deer carcasses out. For the most part, they try, but unsuccessful. So we would estimate 379 coyote packs in Rhode Island. If you remove those, and we can do this, everything we found we can fix with community involvement, and this is what we've been talking about all day, and it drops to 253 coyote packs in Rhode Island, about 2 to 4 adults per pack, average 3. A 33% drop in the Rhode Island coyote population if we do this. I think that will make people happy. So, how does this relate to biodiversity? It's nifty to manage coyotes because it's really great to make people happy. And it's also great because this is a very non-invasive way. And this will also cause a lot of inner city wildlife issues to evaporate. The behavior problem is probably the worst. As soon as people start covering their recycling, not composting delicious delectables in the yard, things will change. Feral cats is a big thing. And as soon as the state develops a system, and they're trying, to get rid of livestock, diseased livestock, road-killed deer because they have chronic wasting, they're afraid of chronic wasting, that will be absolutely key. So what will happen then? We'll be able to let the coyotes do their job because they're going to expand their territories because they're hungry. And then when they're hungry, they're going to go get their own deer. And that'll be okay because we have 15 to 20 deer per square mile in the wildest parts of Rhode Island and double that in the suburbs. In fact, I had one in the parking lot. And I parked today and it was like, meh. Anyway, not just, okay, so deer, quick. If you drive down any road with forest on any side, you will see the browse line for deer in Rhode Island. 138 is a great example. I can ride my horse through woods I used to get it to just wiggle myself through. The ground is covered with the undesirable invasives or toxic or thorny or otherwise unpalatable plants for deer. So they've eaten everything. They've eaten the understory diversity. That means we lose our hermit thrushes, our water thrushes, other shrub nesting birds. All our herps are reliant on protection from aerial predators, and we have either no plants or just a monoculture of things. This will, the coyote can act as the new police, balancing the native organisms in the environment. When one gets abundant, the coyote will eat them, and focus on that. Because why? It's easy, it's what they do. So that's it, basically. This is what I'm going to propose to DEM in a management plan, and I've been working with David Gregg, Kyle Hess, DEM, and a really great organization called Coyote Smarts, as well as URI. And basically, it's a management plan that says if we aggressively manage ourselves, the food we provide to coyotes, they will drop their population to a level sustainable by natural resources. And then they will help us manage biodiversity in the state. Huh.
Thank you, Numi. Wow. All right. Oh, Numi has lots and lots of questions. How about can you take 2 of them?
Sure.
Okay.
So what do you like? Are people concerned about coyotes being a threat to pets on town? They're absolutely.
A threat to pets if people are irresponsible about their pets. Cats should not be outdoors at all. Anyway, if you care about wildlife, why would you let your cat outside? They're an Asian and European species, so they don't belong in our environment. Okay, so I try to tell people that it's their responsibility. Coyotes are here. Be careful with your pets. What else? Oh, what could be done with a roadkill deer? My favorite question. David, why are you shaking your head? Okay, I'll make it quick. In 2011, we had a conservation innovation grant from NRCS, and we went around and picked up all the deer in Rhode Island, dead deer. CEM was so happy with us. It was great. And we rented a bioliquidator, which is what we call a safe cycle machine. Put the deer we collected in a week into this machine, basically put in the degrading stuff, potassium hydroxide, and turned on the switch, and 18 hours later we had biosecure, so no chronic wasting disease, super nutritious bouillon with a little bit of bone that you could crush. It was amazing. So farmers will love it. It is great on grass. So what we're trying to do is get dead body depots going, you know? And, or mobile, they're also mobile units. Anyway, so that's how. So I call it safe cycle to make it more acceptable to people. But it's alkaline hydrolysis is what the answer is. And it's a good solution, and thank you for asking.
Thank you, Numi. We're just keeping that Halloween theme strong for you all this afternoon. Okay, and we have one last but not least talk. Thank you all for staying for the pollinators. This is going to be Dr. Katie Burns. She is the Pollinator Atlas entomologist with the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management's Division of Fish and Wildlife. Katie has worked with native wild insect pollinators for about a decade as both a researcher and an interpretive naturalist. Most recently, she spent 4 years in Ireland as a PhD researcher studying the contributions and conservation of Irish insect pollinators. Awesome. I think the computer is telling me that it's getting tired.
One more left.
I know. Where are you? You're there. Okay.
These guys. Amazing. Hello, everyone. Thanks for sticking around. All right. I've learned so much about fish today. I didn't know anything about fish, and now I feel like I'm an expert. But yeah, today I'm going to talk a little bit about the Rhode Island Pollinator Atlas, which is a project that I've been working on for the past 2 years. So first, I know I just gave a little introduction, but why am I talking to you about these guys? Who am I? So I've been a research assistant and science communicator for a really long time. I did that before my PhD in Ireland. I've always been really into insect pollinators and into insects ever since I was really little. In November 2021, I was hired as the Pollinator Atlas entomologist with RIDEM. And I was slotted into outreach, actually, as opposed to the biology unit, which actually ended up working really well because I have this background as an interpretive naturalist. And pollinators are really sexy, and everyone wants to hear about them. So it ended up working really well. But before I get into the work that I've been doing specifically at DEM, let's just talk about pollinators in general and why they're important and why we should care about them. I'm sure you guys have heard a lot through the media, but I'm just going to try and sum up some of that information for you. So first of all, just for anyone who isn't familiar, pollination is the transfer of the male part of the plant, pollen, to the female part of the plant, the stigma, and this is what helps that plant produce seeds and fruits. Which not only helps the plant reproduce, but also helps provide food for other species. So there are many different species of pollinators. There are insects, birds, mammals. Some even like reptiles do it, which is kind of cool. But the majority are insects, like our bees, flies, and moths. So animal pollination in natural systems is super, super important. Almost 90% of our flowering plants are pollinated by some sort of animal in some way. So as I mentioned before, this supports really healthy food webs by providing food not only for the herbivores that eat these plants, but also for the things that eat those herbivores who eat those plants. So it's all a system. We need to keep it all in balance. Insect pollination is also so important for our food security. So about 76% of our global crops depend in some way on animal pollination, which accounts for about 35% of our global food production. I love this picture from Whole Foods, which shows your options for food with and without pollinators. So with pollinators and without, we lose quite a lot. So these guys give us a lot in the way of food. And not just, food mass and like the different species that we're gonna be eating, but also our nutrients. Pollinators are responsible for the majority of our vitamin C, vitamin A, and calcium intake. So very, very important. That's called hidden hunger. And these services account for about between $147 and $485 billion per year to our global economy. So you can think about these numbers as the amount of money we would have to pay people to do this work that pollinators largely do for free. So not anything to bat an eye at. And there's also been plenty of research out there that shows by increasing insect pollinator diversity, so not just relying on one species, can really help these crop pollination services. So who are the pollinators? Who is carrying out this heroic work? So we're going to start with the familiar faces, the ones that everyone's probably already knows. So we have our honeybee, who's the one who's visiting there, very recognizable, little golden bee. We have our monarch butterflies, huge, flashy. We all know about them. They eat milkweed. Wow, it's a miracle. And also bumblebees, which are so fat and fluffy and look like, I feel like people like to describe them as like flying teddy bears or flying panda bears or something. They do sting, so don't try and cuddle them. Some people don't know that. So these are what I refer to as the charismatic megafauna of the pollinator world. These are the ones that we all know about. They are widely recognizable, and I like to consider them a really good gateway insect. So for people who are kind of maybe nervous about bugs, like it's kind of hard to not be enchanted by a monarch butterfly. Or like if a beekeeper shows you the inside of a hive that's dripping with honey, you're like, okay, I'm in. Insects are kind of cool. So really good gateway insect. However, these guys receive disproportionate attention compared to other equally, if not more important, pollinator species. So this is especially the case for our little queen honeybees. So these guys are really popular in the media. They're used in pretty much all of the Save the Bees campaigns as the poster child. They also receive the majority of research funding and conservation focus. So while it's good that these insects are receiving attention, and in some cases, the same actions that would defend one species would help another, we're kind of missing out on the whole picture. And you might be looking at me like, Katie, why are you trying to tell us to care less about honeybees? Aren't they the ones we should be saving? So this is my little hot take on honeybees based on facts. So honeybees are actually a non-native managed livestock species. They're not a native species here in North America. They were brought over in the early 17th century by colonizers. So today they're used for artisanal product production, so honey, wax, pollen, all those like pollen that they like to sprinkle on your food in fancy restaurants. It doesn't really do much, so it's okay if you don't want to pay for that. And crop pollination, they're really important for our current agricultural systems. Our current agricultural systems call for roadside-to-roadside crops that are regularly treated with many pesticides, which means that they're not good environments for wild insects to live. So what do? They ship in thousands and thousands of these managed honeybees. And that's how we're able to eat a lot of the foods that we do. They are required for that system as it is, but I think we should probably change that system. So these guys got a lot of media attention in the early 2000s because beekeepers started to notice that their colonies were dying off. This eventually became known as colony collapse disorder and was attributed to a variety of factors, most of which varroa mite, different diseases, pesticide exposure. However, CCD, as it's going to be called, is actually no longer considered a major threat, and there's a lot of research that's gone into how to monitor your hives and mitigate these losses. And there's actually more honeybees now in the world, more than ever in any time in human history. So just to kind of put that in perspective, it's kind of like getting chickens to save the birds. So that all said, starting an apiary is not a conservation action, even though there's all of these like bees in cities initiatives, cover your roofs with bees. Please don't do that. You can, if you are interested in having homegrown honey, or if you're looking to supplement your crop pollination services, oh my goodness, get honeybees. That's great. That's what livestock is for. It's for providing these services. However, there is a lot of research out there now showing that honeybees can compete with wild bees for resources, and they can also spread diseases. Because again, when you're shipping thousands and thousands of insects in tiny boxes, in trucks, there's a lot of room for disease transfer, and these diseases can be passed on to wild bees. So responsible apiary management is key. If you keep honeybees, just make sure you register your apiary, you're joining a honeybee beekeeper community, and you avoid placing these bees on conservation areas or areas without ample forage to reduce competition. Okay, so now we're going to go on to my favorite pollinators, the unsung heroes. So I divided them into 3 groups. So first we have the other bees, which is so many more than honeybees and bumblebees. So we have 20,000 species of bee worldwide, 3,600 in North America, and 250 estimated right here in Rhode Island. So the majority of these bees are solitary bees, meaning they don't have a queen or workers, they don't make honey, they're just a single mom doing her best. About 30% of these are cavity nesters, meaning hollow or pithy stems, or maybe little cavities in rock walls. 70% are ground nesters, which are literally just kind of holes in the ground. And they come in a wide diversity of sizes, colors, and food preferences. So the example I have up here is our wonderful little bicolored green striped sweat bee, who's super cute, and I found right here in Rhode Island. Then we have our triple threats. So these guys are my favorites. I love them so much, mostly because other people do not like them, and I think it's ridiculous. So we have our wasps. So we have an example here of a little hotter wasp. Oh, so cute. And then we have our flower flies. Look at this tricky fly. It's trying to make us think it's a wasp. It's not. It doesn't even have a stinger. So these guys are really important because not only are they pollinators, they also carry out the services of pest control. They're going to eat all the critters that live in your garden, that are eating your plants. And they also are really good at decomposition at different parts of their lifestyle, or life cycles. So triple threats. And flower flies in particular are super important because they don't live in nests like wasps and bees do. So that means that if habitat has a major overhaul, they're not going to be too affected as long as they still have something to eat. So they can fill gaps where those bees and wasps would have been. And then we have the night shift. So we have our beetles and our moths. These are the ones who pollinate night blooming flowers. And up until very recently, we weren't even considering them to be important pollinators. They are highly under-researched, as are flower flies and wasps. So all of these guys are receiving just not enough attention in both like the research and the conservation world, but every bit of research we do on them just keeps saying, yeah, they're really, really important. Why haven't we been paying attention? It's literally because people don't like them, and they also don't like going out at night. I wish I was lying, but that's really what it is. No one wants to do night studies. So, what do these pollinators need? Why is it important that we're focusing on this wide diversity of important pollinators when we're thinking about pollinator conservation? So first we have food. This is the obvious one. When you hear about saving the bees, often it's like, plant a garden, mow your lawn less. Cool, that is part of it. So nectar and pollen of native flowering plants is super important. We absolutely should be removing invasive species to let those native flowers come back. A great example of that earlier. And planting natives where we can if you have a green thumb. But these plants are also really important for different stages of insect development. So the vegetal parts of the plant. I know I get a lot of people who grow milkweed for pollinators being like, oh my gosh, something is eating all of the milkweed that I planted for these monarchs. And I'm like, that's exactly what is supposed to happen. That you're planting it for the caterpillars. You're not planting it necessarily for the things that are coming to feed on the nectar. So it's really important as a host plant for butterflies and moths, all different types of plants. And it's really important that we have a continuous flow of these resources. You can't just plant one species and call it good. You have to have a diversity of species from early spring until late fall. That way you're supporting pollinators all season long. Because they all emerge at different times. There isn't just one push at the beginning. Also shelter. So most insects actually don't require nests. They're very happy hiding in leaf litter or under tree bark. But bees and wasps do. And they need things like bare ground, tussocky grasses, rock piles, brush piles, old stumps and logs. Basically all of the things we really like to get rid of on our lawns. So I always try and encourage people to embrace the mess, to give these pollinators a home. It's also really important to keep leaf litter on the ground. This is very relevant right now at the point in the season. To leave the leaves, because there are many insects that hibernate in the leaf litter. If you're raking them up and putting them in plastic bags and throwing them out, you're throwing away next year's moths and butterflies. Sorry. And also safety. So these pollinators deserve to live in a safe environment where they're not constantly under onslaught of chemicals. So reducing chemical pesticide and fertilizer exposure. Chemical fertilizers can be bad for those ground nesting bees. Reducing outdoor lighting, which can really confuse nighttime pollinators and can lead to exhaustion or just general lack of navigation. And also planting hedgerows as windbreaks. Again, we really like clear environments, but encouraging these nice bushes that can help break some of the winds during storms to help keep these pollinators alive. So lots of things we can do. And it's important that we do these things because, as Lou mentioned, not only pollinators, but all insects are really suffering right now. The main culprit in all of this is land use change. So this is increased urbanization and agricultural intensification, which can lead to habitat loss and fragmentation. Pesticide use, which can alter insect behavior or just kill the insects outright. Herbicides can also limit food resources in the landscape. Climate change is a big one, which can alter the emergence times of flowers and insects, which means they might be mismatched in when their preferred flowers come out. Or a plant might come out before and then die and not get pollinated. Also parasites and diseases. So as I mentioned before, managed insects can readily pass these parasites and diseases on to our wild insects. So it's really important that people who are raising these managed insects are very careful about monitoring them for disease. So that leads us to the pollinator atlas. So with all of this in mind, pollinators are important. They have needs. They're under threat. What are we going to do? So we caught the buzz. So we formed the Rhode Island Pollinator Atlas at DEM, which is a plan to comprehensively inventory Rhode Island's pollinating insects. And they hired me to do it. Hey, thank you. So we wanted this project to have implications for future management where we would collect data on the different species and the habitats that they were using so that we could better inform management. With a significant volunteer and outreach component so we could also get people really excited about pollinators. So when I was first hired, the initial challenges of forming this project were first that there are a lot of pollinating insect groups. So if we want to inventory them all, that could take a really, really, really long time. So we needed to narrow down which groups we were actually going to consider pollinators to inventory for this project. And also, all of these different pollinators need different survey methods. You can't just go out and find everything. Like, they're out at different times, they require different types of catching, some of them are only identifiable under a microscope, so there's also different ID skills you need. This is a very big undertaking. So eventually we decided that we were going to just inventory bees, butterflies, moths, and flower flies, which in itself is a 20-year commitment. So here are some of the projects that we have come up with so far since I was hired in 2021. So in terms of insect pollinator monitoring, we have 2 active projects right now. So we have the Rhode Island Bumblebee Survey, RIDEM, and Rhode Island Wild Bee Observer, RUBO. And we also are piloting the Rhode Island Wild Bee Survey. So I'm not going to go into that as much because we're still very much in the pilot stage, but this is going to be inventorying basically all of our little small social and eusocial and solitary bees. But I'll talk more about RIDEM and RUBO in a second. And then, as I mentioned before, I'm an outreach biologist, so there's been a huge outreach component to this project. So we have our Pollinator Pals Critter Kit. If you guys don't know about the Rhode Critter Kits, you should absolutely come to our table after this and talk to Mary, our outreach coordinator, about it, because they're amazing. We have lots of wildlife fact sheets. We have our publications where we publish about pollinators. We have a really amazing YouTube series that is very funny. I do say so myself. You should definitely check it out. And lots of outreach events, and also volunteering at the Biologist as the bee band. So let's go into these community science projects a little bit more. So first we have RIDEM, the Rhode Island Bumblebee Survey. So as I mentioned before, bumblebees are an amazing gateway insect. They are cute and fluffy, and they're actually identifiable by sight, so you don't have to kill them to identify them, which is very rare for bee species. And about 50% of our species are in decline in eastern North America, so they're definitely a good species to monitor. I think someone said earlier, like, you're always beginning your monitoring too late, so you got to start now. And this project was also going to complement current regional and state-specific efforts. So if any of you know of the Circe Society for Invertebrate Conservation, they're running several bumblebee atlases, especially in the Pacific Northwest. And we modeled our project very much after theirs so that we could maybe compare data eventually, because collaboration is cool. And also there's the URI Bumblebee Survey, where they have been doing work for several years, doing sort of hatch surveys throughout the state. So this was a very timely project. So just a little bit about the bumblebees in Rhode Island. About 5 of our 12 historical Rhode Island species are now going undetected in our state. And part of this project would be to see if maybe they are still here, just maybe in tiny pockets. 3 of our historic Rhode Island bumblebee species are listed as vulnerable. And we do have an IUCN red listed and federally listed species on that list, the rusty patch bumblebee, which has kind of become the poster child for bumblebee conservation at least. And in 2021, we also had a new species detected, the black and gold bumblebee, Bombus vercumus, who's right up there. So that indicates that there might be some range shifts from other states. So again, a very timely survey. We're trying to figure out what's happening with bumblebees in our state. So the main aims of this project are to determine the current status and distribution of our bumblebee species, identify specific floral species and habitats associated with them, assess their relative abundances, and also potential threats. This will all help to inform future management. And the major outcomes predicted for this project will be a huge distribution map, so you're going to be able to see where all of the species are, and a write-up for each species, evidence-based recommendations for future habitat management, and again, a really significant volunteer effort and community science effort, and engagement and outreach opportunities. Because again, getting people excited about this is a major component of this project. I want people to care about the bees in their backyard. So just an overview of what this project is set up like. So like I mentioned, it's very similar to the Pacific Northwest Bumblebee Atlases. We arranged it for a 3-year data collection period with a pilot season in 2022. So we're actually in our first real season right now. I have a few volunteers in the room, and they all know they have 1 survey left to do for October, and then they're done for the year. So yay, thanks guys. So what we did basically is we divided the state up into 165 grid cells, and this is the same map that's used by the Rhode Island Breeding Bird Atlas, because interspecies management is very important to me, and I wanted us to maybe eventually be able to mesh the bird and bee data so that we could maybe see what habitats were being used by both. And the way that we have volunteers pick their cells, or they pick 1 grid cell, and then they pick 1 hectare site within that grid cell. and they survey it once a month from April to October, which is a huge effort, and I am so excited that so many people have wanted to do this so far. We have 50 volunteers right now who are just absolute rock stars. And the reason we wanted to do it for this long amount of time is because we wanted to see the different emergence times of different species and also the plant communities that they were taking advantage of. So these are 45-minute surveys of bumblebees and also the eastern carpenter bee, because the eastern carpenter bee is the same size as a bumblebee, and I figured while you're out there, look for it also. And then also they do a rapid habitat assessment. So if that sounds really fun to you and you want to look like these cool people with nets, I would love it if you would join for our final year. We have about 95 cells still to get through. We're definitely narrowing it down to some priority cells, but we will need as many hands as possible, and I would love to have you be part of it. And feel free to ask me more questions about it after this talk. Okay, and then we have Rubo. So this is a much less time-intensive community science project. So the one before is I'm really into this. I want to learn all about bumblebees. I want to go out and be a rock star. Huge commitment, but it's going to be so fun. This one is more I take pictures of bees anyway, and I want that to turn into data. And I say, yes, please. So basically, the Rhode Island Wild Bee Observer is where you submit incidental observations of bees to iNaturalist, which is a very popular community science application and website that I'm sure a lot of you already use. So this will still help us to determine the status and distribution of many of our Rhode Island wild bee species and support and augment data of more time-intensive surveys. So the other project that I told you we're piloting right now. So just for those who don't know what iNaturalist is an online community of naturalists. It's a community science platform for recording observations of all living things, not just bees. We're just doing a little bee project within the larger scope of iNaturalist, which creates research quality community science data, which I just think is the coolest thing, because so often in institutions, data is just hoarded and kept away and competed for, and you pay for it, and this is just no, this is for everyone. So use iNaturalist, it's awesome. And also it can help you build your ID skills, because if you upload a picture of something and you don't know what it is, an expert will come in and be this is what it is, and then now you've learned something. So it's really as easy as this. You see a bee, you take a picture of that bee, and then you submit it to iNaturalist, and that's all you have to do. I love this picture. I think that's David. Yeah, that's you. We found some mating bumblebees, and all became amateur pornographers. So the benefits of this project, it's an opportunity to learn more about those bees in your backyard. It's a very low time commitment, and you can just do it whenever you want. You get those expert species ID verifications, and all observations, common and rare, are welcome. So it's a very easy community science project. So please do it. So yeah, sound fun? Get outside, start taking pictures of bees. So just to go over our outreach programs a little bit more, just to wrap up. So first, like I said, we have our Pollinator Pals Critter Kit, which again, you can talk to Mary more about afterwards. But this is basically a free wildlife curriculum kit for educators. Anyone can rent it out. Even if you don't rent out our props that are associated with the kit, you can get the activity sheets online for free. So it's really cool. Like I said before, we have our different wildlife fact sheets. So we have one on wasps, one on bees, one on butterflies, and one on flower flies. And I actually have physical copies of those on our table, which you can come pick up, but they're also available on our website. So thank you guys so much for your attention and for sticking with me. I'll take any questions.
But I have one last Menti question to ask you as you walk out the door. This is relevant for next year's planning. We want to know what topic you would like us to cover next year. Last year, we talked about plastic pollution. This year was biodiversity conservation. What should we do next year? What would you like to hear about? What is timely and interesting to all of you? We love convening and collaborating with all sorts of different folks across the watershed. So please let us know what you think would be interesting. And while you do that, I'd like to just give some thanks. Thank you first to the Roger Williams University events and AV staff, who once again made this event incredibly easy for us to host. They're a really great team to work with. Thank you to our presenters, both our speakers and our tablers, who made time to talk to us today about their passions. Thank you to my colleagues, Mariel Sorleen, and especially Dr. Courtney Schmidt, who expertly handled much of the behind-the-scenes coordination with our presenters today. And finally, thank you to all of you, our audience, for taking the time with us to learn today. I hope you enjoyed the day. Please send us your feedback. We've got business cards, I think, up on the registration table. And please also take food home. There should still be food out in the hall. We've got some to-go boxes for you, actually. I think they're compostable. I'm not sure they're home compostable, but anyway, please take some food home. Help us avoid some food waste. And I hope we see you next year for next year's NBEP Science event. Thank you.